Ye Ran helped Oshin up and comforted him, saying no Guga meant well, only that he liked to be earnest, while no Guga scratched his head and looked away. Just then I walked over with an easy smile and told no Guga his legwork had improved, and to come practice. He nodded, eager, sure of late that he might finally win. Oh, Shin watched, curious whether this great master was truly so strong, whether he could beat no Guga across 2 whole realms. I waved him in. He grinned and lunged, and my kick sent him tumbling more than 30 feet, carving a long furrow in the snow, seeing stars his inside shifting. Oshin stared, having never even seen the kick land. Ye Ran hurried over, praising my legs as faster and faster, and I rubbed her head. Did Oshin wish to learn legwork in future? I asked, since his long span made him worth teaching. He answered yes, firm and strong, nothing like his usual weakness. No Guga began to wail in the snow, so I walked over, looked down, and told him to drop the act, and asked whether he liked sparring this way. He tilted his head, saw my serious face, and admitted he had been wrong. I pulled him up and brushed the snow off him. A true powerhouse, I said softly, was not one who beat the stronger, but one who mastered his own arrogance and refused to bully the weak. He rubbed his chest and turned the words over hard. Oshin heard them too, and his heart shook, for in the Thousand Autumns Pavilion bullying the weak was the rule, and being weak, even his father and brothers had bullied him. Well said, he thought. None of them were powerhouses at all, and the way he looked at me changed. Teach Oshin his legwork first, I told no Guga, clapping his shoulder, and he nodded, not daring to refuse. Then I took Ye Ran up the mountain to tend the new seeds. As for Jung Hyun Dan, he had shut himself away to recover, and I did not disturb him. Days passed, and Oshin's arrival made the valley livelier, the 3 young ones forever teasing and scuffling. At year's end, one night, I sat reading in my room, no longer the Travels of the Azure Wanderer, but a book called The Secret History of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion. It came from the Valley Library, true or false I could not say, but diverting all the same. The lamp swayed, cold air slipping through the window cracks, and I, already at the 6th level of Foundation establishment, sat unmoved. When I finished the page, I set the book down to begin my daily plan, and just then a faint sound came from the next room. Someone had slipped out, very lightly, but not lightly enough for my ears. It was Oshin. I knew every aura in the valley, so I placed him at once, and I listened as his steps carried him to the library, where the boy began flipping through the shelves. What was he after, I wondered. In my mind, Oshin was an honest sort, doing whatever I said him seriously, unlike no Guga who slacked at times. He had a competitive streak second only to no Guga's, forever losing at sparring and coming back for more. Perhaps he sought a secret manual. The thought made me pity my junior brother, and I decided to teach him myself from the next day on. Oh, Shin searched for half an hour, then crept back to his room. After a while I rose, slipped out, and set off for the forest more than 10 miles away to carry out my daily plan. Another summer came. I passed my 22nd birthday. My lifespan already passed 4,000 years, which I meant to hoard until I reached 10,000 before spending. Half a year on, my daily plan had carried my cultivation to the 7th level of Foundation establishment, though my surface level still showed the 3rd of Chi refining. The longer I went, the more I burned to find the 7th rank spirit tree Jung Hyundan had spoken of. But I could not locate the entrance underground. Oshin took to groping about the mountains at night as well, and once we nearly collided, saved only by my keen ears. Near noon I crouched under a tree, watching the white spirit rat spin wildly before me. Very lively. Grown, I wondered, though spring was clearly past. I had raised it for years and its size had never changed, and without Li Ya I could not judge its growth. The little thing had circled before me half the morning. It seemed to catch my meaning, for it suddenly leapt, nipped my hand, and darted off, then stopped and spun again. It did not hurt, so I felt no anger, and my gaze followed it. Wait. Could it be? I rose and walked toward it, and seeing me come it stopped and ran for the forest. One man and one rat soon lost among the trees. Off by the plots Oshin watched me go, frowning, thinking of the forest again. Both Li Ya and Mang Rang had loved to cultivate alone in these mountains, he had heard, and the great master's legwork ran far past his level, so perhaps the forest held a mystery. The more he thought it, the surer he grew, and rather than chase me he decided to sneak over at night. Meanwhile, I followed the white spirit rat over ridge after ridge, clear out of the valley. Such a wide daily range for the creature. I had underestimated it, and grew only more curious where it would lead. Li Ya had called it a treasure-hunting rat once. Could it already have found the 7th rank spirit tree? I had truly underestimated its range, following it more than 10 miles with no stop in sight. The farther I drew from Mystic Valley, the less I liked it. I had been to the outer sect, but that was one road. With the valley as my center, I felt anything past a 20-mile radius was dangerous, even at the 7th level of Foundation establishment. Luckily, the rat did not run forever. Nearly 20 miles out, it stopped by a small stream tumbling down from the hills and began to circle. Flowers and grass lined both banks among rocks of every size. I picked the rat up and swept my right leg across the ground, and grass and stones flew, clearing a wide open patch. There by the stream lay a square stone slab. A manhole cover, I thought. I crouched over it and found it carved with strange patterns, characters and drawings unlike any I had seen. A thread of spiritual chi leaked from its edges, which was likely how the rat had found the place. A Foundation establishment cultivator held divine sense, an unseen power that once extended, worked like a heavenly eye to peer through solid things. I rarely used mine, but I had it, and I gathered it now to pierce the slab and see the space below. The moment my divine sense touched the stone, a mysterious force threw it back, and my body trembled. So strong. Even a 7th level Foundation establishment cultivator's sense could not break its restriction. I hesitated. With a restriction this fierce, some great danger might wait below, and with spiritual chi surging inside, either a heaven and earth treasure was being nurtured there or someone sat in seclusion. No, I could not be reckless. I would watch a while first. I set the rat down, moved rocks and weeds back over the slab until it was wholly hidden, then took up the rat and turned for the valley while it squeaked in protest. Back at Mystic Valley, I breathed no word of it to anyone, as though I had never left. On the nights that followed, besides my daily plan, I went to watch the slab, and its cover stayed undisturbed night after night. I also noticed Oh Shin slipping into the mountains each night after something of his own. I did not expose him. My gut told me his identity was no simple thing, since a span past 300 years at the 2nd level of chi refining meant some strange art. Yet when I watched him cultivate with my divine sense, I saw only ordinary chi absorption. So the fierce summer passed. Mystic Valley turned a pale yellow, and I had opened 17 garden plots across the surrounding slopes, so that So Chion and the others patrolled every day. One evening, Zhang Hyundan found me and signaled with his eyes for me to follow, and master and disciple walked toward the northern peak. I watched his back with a tangled heart. His span had fallen again until his age matched it, which meant he was about to die. He had set me up, yet he had given me a great deal, and with him near the end I could not help a pang of feeling, which I fought down. I was walking the road of immortality, and I would meet many partings and grow used to them in time, provided I kept living. Oh Shin, watering plants marked the direction we took and silently noted that stretch of mountain. Once we were among the trees, the old man spoke. He was taking me to the entrance that led underground, he said, and I was to tell no one of it, not even my junior brothers and sister. They might be close today, but they would become strangers once they left to train outside. I did not argue. I had always known it. So long as they held to their goal of the outer sect, we would part ways. I asked whether he had been a man of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion from the first, or been chosen later. His steps grew heavier, and he said his path was the same as mine, that he had inherited the role from his own master. I fell silent, and felt suddenly that he too was a pitiable man. After he had done certain things for his master, he said, the identity could not be shed, but he did not regret it. I wanted to speak and stopped. I had done nothing yet, so could I still get free? He began recounting his own master, a man of odd temper, sometimes strict and sometimes flighty as a child, like an old child who never grew up. We came round to the back of the peak, and he stopped before a mountain wall furred with moss and vine. Was the Grand Master alive or dead now? I could not help asking, thinking of the slab I had watched, which sat not far off and might well be his master's work. He had bade farewell and left before he passed, the old man said, and he would follow that example, leaving tomorrow and handing all of the valley to me. My brows drew together, my mind not on him but on his master. In other words, that master might still be alive. He drew a compass from his sleeve, parted the vines, found a groove in the wall, and pressed the compass in. He fed its spiritual chi until it hummed and glowed faintly, and I felt his aura thin further. I feared he might die on the spot. The wall shook with a low sound. A hole opened in it, and I had to stoop to enter. Go in, he said. He would wait outside. Master, I said, give me the compass, and I will go in once you have gone. He smiled, took it off, and handed it to me. A stone door sealed the opening again. Fitting so perfectly the wall looked whole, no entrance at all. He turned and walked down the mountain, and I followed. The space below held a full set of formations, he told me low, as if setting his affairs in order, so any spiritual plant I wished to keep hidden from others I could raise there. I listened close, grateful for all he had done and yet never fully at ease, since one could not relax until the very end. He was about to die, and when he died I would relax, and thereafter I would burn incense for him each year and honor him. The walk down was slow, his voice faint, laying out every detail of the place, too many and too specific to be false, and by the time we reached the valley it was dark. His last words to me were that the road of life was long, that a plain talent was sometimes a gift, since it left a man free to do what he wished. I watched him climb back to his pavilion and close the door, and stood a while longer, wondering what I was thinking, before I went to my own courtyard. That night I cultivated straight through. Just before dawn I heard his steps, went to the window and watched him go down, limping and slow, never once looking my way. He walked straight for the valley mouth until his back vanished there, and still I did not leave the window. When the first sun crested the eastern peak, it fell on me and stretched my shadow long. As Socheon, No Guga, Ye Ran, and Oshin woke one by one, they all felt the valley was wrong, and soon saw why. I had not led them in the morning drill, that body-tempering art called chicks taking flight, which I never missed in wind or rain. Not until noon did I appear and gather them to say Jung Hyundan had left, and that from today I was master of the valley. The three were half thrilled and asked where he had gone, since he had grown gentle and kind after Li Ya left, and they thought well of him. Only Oshin felt little. After half an hour of chatter, they scattered. I climbed the mountain and gazed off the way he had gone, and once his figure was long lost, I went to his room. His pill furnace still stood, and the table beside it held many things: a storage pouch, letters, keys, even a jar of spirit flowers. I took up the letter, and its words were plain. He knew I loved to pick flowers and plants, it said, and before leaving he left me the 5th grade tiger blood flower to pick as a parting gift. A smile came to my face, and I lifted the storage pouch, the thing I wanted most, since what cultivator went without one? So I began going through the inheritance he had left. Not until evening did I leave his pavilion, a new purple cloth bag at my waist, his storage pouch. I walked to the northern peak, to the wall of the underground entrance, drew the compass from the pouch, and pressed it into the groove. With a low roar, a cave mouth opened. I took the compass off and ducked inside, and after only 5 steps the passage widened while the entrance sealed behind me. Once it had shut fully, I walked on down the tunnel. My 7th level divine sense let me move as if in daylight, unhindered, and the passage widened the farther I went, as though it had no end. I grew more curious than ever about Jung Hyundan's master. What manner of person had dug such a vast network underground? The tunnel wound downward, and after more than 10 miles I had still not reached the bottom, so I could be sure the space beneath the stone slab joined this network. A gust of spiritual chi brushed my face and left me refreshed. The way ahead brightened, and I saw crystals of many colors set in the walls. But sensing them carefully, I found they were not spirit stones, which disappointed me greatly. Had they been, I would have made a fortune. I kept my senses high all the while, for kind as Jung Hyundan had been to the end, the memory of what he had done to Mang Rang kept me from dropping my guard. What if it had all been an act? A few miles more and the tunnel ahead grew very bright, and I heard running water. I had reached the entrance. I crept forward, looked into the space beyond, and my eyes went wide. I had truly struck it rich. Ahead lay a vast underground hollow, several times larger than Mystic Valley, hundreds of feet from floor to ceiling. A giant tree over 300 feet tall stood at its center, its trunk broad enough that a dozen men could not have ringed it. Its branches were few but hung with lantern-like fruits, crystal clear and glowing blue. Lush grass spread beneath it, and an underground river some 20 feet wide ran along the edge against the wall. My probe named the tree the Azure Vine Tree, 7th rank, 245 years old, a current span of 9,999 against a ceiling of 87,600. 87,000 years for a ceiling, nearly 10,000 of current span. The sight tempted me at once to tear it up, but I held back. By Jung Hyundan's account, this 7th rank tree was the key to the underground formation, presiding over the whole of it. It let the other treasures grow, while the chi they gathered fed the formation, which in turn nourished the tree. Uprooted, and I would lose a planting ground of vast potential. The place could serve as my immortal cave besides, since the formation was thorough enough that cultivating or breaking through here would not leak a sound outside. Strange stone statues sat embedded in the walls all around, dozens of them, deep runes running between. I stepped from the tunnel, and just inside stood a stone tablet with 4 words carved on it: the 8 sceneries grotto heaven. I glanced at it and walked on in, working the probe like mad. 3rd rank and 4th rank plants grew everywhere, their rank climbing the closer I came to the tree, until my head spun. With a treasure vault like this hidden here, Jung Hyundan still could not reach Foundation establishment? I did not know whether to pity him for his poor talent or his thin alchemy. Even short on craft, he could have sold plants for spirit stones, or paid a sect alchemist to refine pills. For a sect like the Taehyun, it should hardly have been hard to pour enough into a man to force him to Foundation establishment. Then again, perhaps he had feared exposing his identity. I came to the Azure Vine Tree, and standing beneath it I felt its vastness and vigor all the more. Circling it, I saw the grotto held more than one entrance, 8 in all, and guessed one joined the stone slab I had found. I left the others for now, drew the records of 100 herbs from my pouch, and began matching the plants one by one. harvesting whatever had ripened. Some of the harvest could go to the outer sect to trade for higher rank seeds, and the thought alone thrilled me. Half an hour flew by, and I had reaped over 130 third-rank plants, more than 900 years of lifespan, pushing my total past 5,000. This spy's post was worth it. The grotto held a staggering number of plants, and I had cleared only a tenth, and the lowest rank at that. From now on, this would be my immortal cave, my secret base. Just as I bent for the next plant, a noise turned me around, my eyes fixed on a far tunnel mouth, pitch black and grim. I moved aside, since the grass held ordinary weeds among the plants, and I feared a fight would crush what was mine, and my plants were my life. I walked toward the river, my gaze never leaving that dark mouth. Footsteps and heavy panting came from within, like a beast about to charge. A footstep from the dark, and when I saw the figure clearly I frowned. It was Mang Rang. His hair hung wild, his clothes were rags, he was barefoot, blood-red veins covered his neck. His face was scalded crimson, his eyes bloodshot, white mist pouring from his mouth. He roared and hurled himself at me, fast, closing the gap in a rush. I did not retreat but stepped in to meet him. He leapt to tackle me, I slid aside and drove a knee into his belly, and he flew backward, but my right leg went a little numb, and my frown deepened. How had Mang Rang grown so tough? Even a greedy demon had not been this hard, I judged, though I had used neither full strength nor spiritual chi. I had held back to see whether he could still be saved. He crashed to the grass and, feeling no pain, sprang up and lunged again. I planted my right foot, forced my body to a stop, raised my left leg full of spiritual chi, and loosed the whirlwind shadowless kick. A gale rose from the ground, leg shadows landing on him, one after another, and he flew again, rolling a dozen times before he stopped, his limbs plainly twisted. He tried to crawl up, then dropped, his forehead slamming the grass. I drew my leg back, curious. Was Zhang Hyunda's medicine parasite truly this strong? A body this formidable even at the first rank, no weaker than a greedy demon. How could the old man compare to the great cultivator behind that demon? I grew surer he had hidden things, likely tied to his master. I stood over Mang Rang's grotesque demon-like body, unsure how to deal with him, telling myself he was dead already, so why care what he had been in life? My eyes flickered, and grass and dust began to swirl at my feet as I gathered my power. Then I saw a corner of a book at Mang Rang's chest, and I drew it to my hand through the air with a thread of chi. The 10,000 Gu cultivation technique, I read softly. I flipped through it, a fragmentary manual with a clear gap on the last page, its opening giving cultivation methods and its back recording 5 parasite arts, each illustrated. Comparing them, I found the one that had taken Mang Rang, the flaming corpse Gu. Those it afflicted nursed a flaming chi within. Their bodies turned hard as deep rock, their strength immense, with no cure, no art able to undo it, until they were ground to smithereens. Reading it, I could not help looking at him with pity. How wretched. The manual did give a way to curb the parasite, to seal the 7 orifices so the worms could not feed on spiritual chi. That dropped them into a suspended sleep, leaving the afflicted body unable to move. I sealed Mang Rang's orifices with mud, then stood and looked toward the tunnel he had come from. I did not go to explore it. Even if Zhang Hyundan's master lived, he had not struck at a chi-refining cultivator like me. That meant he either lacked the wish to kill or the power to act, so why alert him? Every day that passed favored me. I slid the manual into my pouch and turned back to harvesting. Half an hour later, I left the 8 sceneries grotto heaven well satisfied, my lifespan risen to a staggering 7,000 years. I had taken all the third-rank plants I could, and next I would sow seeds which would need years to mature, before turning to the 4th-rank plants. To keep the formations balanced, I did not strip every ripe plant at once. Harvest some, plant some, that was the only road to steady growth. A ripe plant left standing only stored more lifespan for me to plunder later, up to some critical point I was still watching for. Early the next morning, as the new master of Mystic Valley, I came out and called the juniors together. I looked them over and told them, smiling, that one day they would all be junior martial uncles. Once I recruited more utility disciples, those newcomers would be my own apprentices, and their martial nephews. The words lit them up, and they fell to arguing happily over the future, none of them mentioning Zhang Hyundan. It was not from coldness but a quiet pact among themselves to leave his name unspoken for a month. I offered a few words of cheer, led them through their limbering drills, and then set off for the 8 sceneries grotto heaven to plant. Life was about to get busy. Inside the grotto, the glow of the azure vine tree's fruits played across the cavern walls, mingled with the shimmer of the river, quiet and lovely. I walked to the base of the tree, set my hands on my hips, looked over the ground I had worked, and smiled, satisfied. One measure of effort, one measure of harvest. Cultivating and farming was the romance I chased, and any fighting or killing or scheming could stay far from me. My gaze drifted. I wanted to raise a small pavilion in here, a place to hide and rest now and then. I was young yet, but in 50 or 60 years I could do as Zheng Hyundan had done. Let an eldest disciple run everything while I enjoyed my life. It was too early for an eldest disciple though. The valley was my foundation, and I had to find the right one, not simply the first to take me as master. Many plans rose in my mind. First, I needed a deputy. So Chan was worth weighing, poor in talent and honest, but too stiff in his dealings with people. No Guga would leave for the outer sect sooner or later, so I ruled him out. As for Ye Ran, better to send her off early and spare my Dao heart. Oh Shin, I would watch and see. I needed more disciples besides. Then I looked up, curious about the tree's fruits, since some heaven and earth treasures took the form of fruit, and wondered whether picking one alone would raise my lifespan. No sooner thought than done. I leapt, seized a fruit, and pulled it free. I landed and studied it, big as a pumpkin, 7 or 8 pounds by the weight. I wrapped the long stem in spirit-protecting paper so the chi would not leak and the fruit would keep its worth. This was all money. About 10 breaths later, a line of text rose telling me I had seized an azure vine fruit of the 6th tier and gained 85 years of lifespan. Good heavens, 85 years. The way I looked at the tree changed on the instant. This cursed thing was a money tree and I must never pull it up. Only cherish it and let it live to the very end. I threw the fruit into my pouch and counted the tree. 16 fruits as large as the first, the smaller ones not yet ready to touch. Some hung high, and I had to climb, longing more than ever for the sword-riding art, since I was only at foundation establishment and could not fly. After much effort I picked all 16, gaining 1,360 years in all, my total risen to 8,400, closer and closer to 10,000. Fine. Strike while the iron was hot. I went on harvesting herbs, my eyes on the panel, meaning to stop the moment I crossed 10,000 years. Half an hour later, a prompt told me my lifespan had passed the 10,000 mark for the first time, unlocking a new power, the lifespan barrier. It let me spend lifespan to raise a barrier that would block all prying, perception, and deduction, the cost set by my cultivation aura and the spiritual chi required. Seeing the word spend lifespan, I frowned, since that was cutting into my life, but the rest of it delighted me. My breakthrough to foundation establishment had made such an uproar, and higher realms would make worse, until in time I would rouse the whole Taeyon sect, a thing I had long dreaded. Now I need not fear it. The power was cautious to a fault, and I loved it. By the time I returned to the valley, it was deep night. I had moved into Zheng Hyundan's pavilion, where many manuals and strange books lay hidden for me to read in time. Inside, I went to a wooden cabinet built of special wood that preserved a treasure's chi, one of several he had told me of. I stored the fruits away, then took one back out and set it on the table. I sat and read the secret history of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion in quiet. Late in the night, the white spirit rat returned and ran up my shoulder, its small eyes fixed on the fruit. I set it on the table and waited. It walked over, sniffed, climbed the fruit, and began to gnaw. I did not know what the fruit could do, since the records of 100 herbs listed nothing above the 5th tier. So I let the rat choose, a spirit beast able to smell poison, and if it could not, I would give it a decent burial. The fruit was 10 times its size and hard going, and I did not help. Waiting was dull, so I might as well break through tonight. I left the pavilion, slipped out of the valley, and went west over ridge after ridge for nearly 20 miles. I sprang to a treetop to scan every direction, and finding no trace or aura of any cultivator, sat on a patch of grass. It had been long since I spent lifespan, and I looked forward to it, for with the barrier I could evolve in safety now. I would try 1,000 years first to test the waters, I thought grandly, since sitting on 10,000, what was 1,000 but a drop? I fed 1,000 years into my cultivation. 30 years of absorption broke me to the 8th level of foundation establishment, 100 to the 9th, and then the divine wood pure yang art drove me against the golden core barrier. I began the tribulation and failed again and again 6 times over. Only at 450 years did I survive the minor heavenly tribulation, condense the golden core, and step into the golden core realm, climbing to its 6th level by the 1,000th year. The 6 failed tribulations nearly stopped my breath. So dark. Was crossing tribulation truly this hard? As the last line fell, my body turned its own art, and feeling the chi of heaven and earth about to riot, I threw up the lifespan barrier. It read a cost of 0 years at first, and as the chi poured in, the 0 jumped to 1. I prayed the drain would not be too great. The vast chi rushed into me and left my whole body clear and light. A wonder, and since I did not move during this breakthrough, I felt no pain. Airwaves rose from the ground and drilled into me from every side, and faintly I could see a shield of air nearly 50 feet across. Beyond it, not a breath of wind stirred, the flowers and trees wholly calm, untouched by me. I wondered why there was no impact, then understood. Once the barrier stood, what I drew on was the chi from underground. That set me fully at ease. Before long, I reached the 9th level of foundation establishment, the barrier having eaten 5 years of my span, which made my heart ache. The thing was too expensive, and it reminded me of the money-draining games of my past life. Dark in a word. Just as I grumbled, I saw bright lights in the sky above a distant wood and squinting, made out cultivators fighting. 10 miles off, above the trees, Shi Yang swung his sword and loosed streaks of sword chi, like a wind rolling through the forest. Li Ya in black stood on a treetop and raised his blade, a pale golden bell of force blooming from him to block it all. Was this all he had? Shi Yang laughed, ferocious and proud, asking how Li Ya meant to fight the fourth prince, or even live to reach the inner sect. Li Ya's face stayed cold, and his gaze cut toward Mystic Valley. No, he would not bring trouble down on us. He dispersed his sword chi and flew off away from the valley, Shi Yang giving chase, the two vanishing at the edge of the night. Inside my barrier I never saw them, but the lights went out, which relieved me. Still, I dared not relax, since the barrier blocked prying and perception but did not make me vanish, and someone might yet blunder in. Time passed under my uneasy watch. The golden core began to condense within me, and when the barrier's cost passed 50 years, I succeeded in core formation. The drain ran high, but it stayed within what I could bear, and the worry I had carried that it might empty me at a stroke fell away. Another thought surfaced then. I had reached the 6th level of golden core, on 1,000 years. Should I keep spending? The night sky was silent, only a stray bird calling, the forest still in the dark, and I sat cross-legged within the barrier and admired the moon, which was lovely tonight, much like my mood. My cultivation had climbed deep into the golden core realm now, the end drawing ever nearer. I meant to spend on until I broke into the nascent soul realm, and then spend more for a new ultimate art, since the whirlwind shadowless kick no longer satisfied me. What nascent soul cultivator fought with his legs? It had to be a sword, and I favored the Li family 7 swords, since a nascent soul cultivation deserved a nascent soul's means of attack. I would assume Zheng Hyundan's master a nascent soul cultivator too, overestimating my foes as far as I could, the surest way to shrink the odds of defeat. With the fighting gone from the sky and not returned, I was wholly at ease. A golden core cultivator could walk sideways through outer sect land, and any who broke in on me could not take a single kick. My cultivation rose again, and my divine sense swelled with it. The golden core realm and foundation establishment were worlds apart, the chi vastly greater, the divine sense so much stronger that mine could now gather into a real striking force. Only here did I feel like a true cultivator. If golden core was already this, how strong must nascent soul be? I could hardly wait. When my growth reached the point of breaking to the next level, I called up the panel, and my eyes went straight to my spiritual root. I had tried to raise it before and felt it a pit that swallowed money whole, a wound in my mind. So I had turned my lifespan elsewhere, and besides, evolving techniques could lift a root as well. But I was strong now and rich in lifespan, so it was time to try again. Once my growth stilled, I poured 2,000 years straight into my spiritual root. 100 years of contemplating heaven, earth, and nature sharpened my feel for the 5 elements, then another 200. At 1,000 years, I caught a trace of the true meaning of heaven and earth. My roots bathed in it, all 5 turning into second-rate mortal body aptitude with the wood root foremost. 1,200 years sharpened them further, and at 2,000, catching the true meaning again while contemplating the earth's veins, all 5 rose to first-rate mortal body aptitude, wood and earth foremost. The first lines made my heart bleed, since the thing really was a bottomless pit. But the end, all 5 roots first rate, lifted my mood, even if it still stung, since the divine wood pure yang art had already carried my wood root to first rate over 1,000 years. I would not think that way. That art had taken 1,000 years to raise a single root, so to lift all 5 would have cost 5,000 at least. Then why not cultivate techniques of the other 4 elements, one might ask? Because a man must experiment to find the perfect path. As I summed it up, the earth's chi surged over again, not to raise my cultivation now, but to temper my bones and marrow. Pain unlike any I had known, and I could only grit my teeth. To distract myself, I studied the panel. Spiritual root aptitude, it seemed, was the hardest thing to raise, which made sense. A root was like a ceiling of lifespan, while cultivation was the current span, and breaking a limit was harder than filling one. Effort earned in this life is never as hard as breaking the fate the heavens set. That was why the Taehyun sect prized geniuses, why a dual-root talent like Ji Hyowu weighed more to them than a lone golden core cultivator. For most people, the fewer the roots, the higher the aptitude. If a person's whole talent were 100, dual roots split at 50 and 50, but 5 roots left only 20 apiece, and being well-rounded could mean being mediocre. I was different now, since raising my aptitude lifted the whole 100 higher. The pity was that root attributes could not be spent on cultivation separately, and the other 4 did little for my divine wood pure yang art, so my speed rose only a little. Yet I noticed the prefix on my first-rate aptitude, mortal body, and wondered whether sacred bodies or spirit bodies weighted above. My mind wandered while the barrier's drain slowed, having eaten 134 years since the breakthrough began. As my aptitude climbed, the chi of each element grew clearer, and my whole sense of the world shifted, the pain giving way to wonder. After a long while, my body stopped drinking chi, and the panel showed first-rate 5-element spiritual roots. I did not rise, but poured 2,000 years into my cultivation. The failed tribulations had scarred me, so I chose to force a miracle by main strength. 1,000 years that left me stuck at the 9th level of golden core would have me coughing blood. A real risk, since a failed tribulation cost 50 years before another attempt. The nascent soul tribulation would surely be harder still, its failures more. 100 years carried me to the 7th level of golden core, 200 to the 8th, 300 to the 9th. Then the divine wood pure yang art forced the break to nascent soul, and the tribulation began. I did not survive the triple mystery heavenly tribulation, and failed again. Only at 1,600 years did I pass it, condense my nascent soul and rise into the nascent soul realm, climbing to its 3rd level by 2,000 years. 12 failures. When I saw the 6th, my heart sank to the floor, and at the 10th my vision went black, but in the end I broke through. Was the nascent soul realm truly so hard to reach? In my near breakdown, I saw why evolving cultivation cost more than the lifespan spent, since it was cultivation stripped bare. Ordinary practice leaned on pills and formations to gather chi and steady a tribulation, to say nothing of rare treasures. The chi of heaven and earth surged over once more, the barriers drained quickening, and I calmed myself and let the rise carry me. The sun swept across the world, and Mystic Valley brightened. I stood on the peak looking over the autumn forest, my robes lifting, the light on me as though I might ascend at any moment. I had condensed a nascent soul and become a true nascent soul cultivator. To reward myself, I raised my apparent level by 1, to the 4th of chi refining. From now on, I would lift it a level a year and stick at the 9th, so as never to be conscripted. I checked the panel again. My lifespan read 22 against 4,502. My root first-rate 5 elements with wood and earth foremost. My cultivation stood at the 3rd level of nascent soul. My techniques, the consummate divine wood pure yang art and dragon force primordial art beside a beginner's alchemy. My ultimate arts were the mastered whirlwind shadowless kick, with the Lee family 7 swords and 8 direction steps still unlearned. I meant to spend on the swords later, then hoard lifespan again until I reached 100,000 before spending more, and for now to rest a few days and settle my racing heart. With an ascent soul cultivation, I could have gone to the Tehan sect for a fine post and fine treatment. But the moment I pictured being sent out to slay demons and fight the demonic path, and perhaps bleed in the sect's own feuds, I put the thought down. Never forget the first intention, and you win the true fruit. Whoever came, it would not move me. I would stay holed up in Mystic Valley to the end. I could hunt a treasure now and then, but I would never shift my ground away from the valley. A higher station might grow my span faster, but the danger climbed with it in step, and I had no enemies, so where was the rush? I turned and walked down the mountain. Nascent soul allowed flight, but I chose to walk. When I reached the valley, the juniors came out one by one, and Ye-Ran greeted me and wondered, without knowing why, whether her senior brother did not somehow look finer today. I smiled and said I had gone to check the seeds, and told her to lead the drills herself. She agreed, wanting to ask more, but I had already turned for the pavilion. Not far off, Ocean watched me and swore to himself there was a mystery in the forest, and that he would surely find it. I climbed the stairs and pushed the door open, and the first thing I saw was the white spirit rat sprawled on the table like a balloon, the azure vine fruit gone. It was still breathing, not dead. I threw a probe on it. The white spirit rat, first rank, 12 years old, a span of 120 against a ceiling of 180. It had gained 70 years, when its whole span had been 50. Was the fruit truly this potent? I went straight to the cabinet, took out an azure vine fruit, and began to gnaw it myself. The moment I bit into the azure vine fruit, a source of heat poured into my belly and warmed my whole body. It worked. I fell to eating in great mouthfuls until the huge fruit was gone clean. While it settled, I called up my panel and waited eagerly for my lifespan to climb. I waited a full half hour for nothing. My lifespan had not risen a single day. My chi and blood had swelled instead, and my physical body was plainly stronger. I wondered whether my realm sat too high for the fruit, or whether the thing only suited spirit beasts and yao beasts rather than a man. I looked at the white spirit rat on the table, still sunk in sleep. Its lifespan had stopped growing, yet its aura kept refining upward, steady as a rising tide, so I told myself to wait and see. The rat slept 3 days. When it woke, it had grown as big as a full-grown cat. It pounced into my arms and rubbed against me, its eyes fixed all the while on the cabinet at my back. I hummed at it over my book and told it plainly that it could eat no more. If it kept swelling, it would surely make trouble, and so Cheon and the others would grow curious. People like Noguga and Ye-Ran would reach the outer sect sooner or later. and I did not want them learning too many of my secrets. The white spirit rat looked up at me pitifully and then, to widen my eyes, it actually nodded. It had understood me. I pointed my right hand to the side and told it to come, and it leapt over without a breath of hesitation. I kept giving orders. So long as they stayed simple, the rat obeyed them all, which only made me fonder of the little thing. At last it looked a bit like a proper spirit beast. I scooped it up and carried it out of the room, into an autumn where every garden lay piled with fallen leaves, so Chion and the others were sweeping, and Medicine Valley was at peace. I walked down the stairs, set the rat down, and told it not to eat about carelessly, pointing at its mouth. It nodded as though it understood, then turned and hopped off. My expression went strange as I watched. Why did it move like a rabbit? Had the fruit not merely lifted its lifespan but gone and tampered with its very blood? The first to notice the rat was Ye Ran, mostly because her gaze had already drifted to me. Then a great white shape came running at her and drove the color from her face. She shrieked that a rat Yao had come, which snapped the heads of No Guga, So Qian, and O Shen around at once. The sight of that enormous rat frightened them all, for none had ever seen a rat the size of a cat. I called for the white spirit rat to slow down. The moment my voice reached it, the beast stopped, glanced back at me, then turned and ambled toward the mountain forest at a gentler pace than before. Seeing that, Ye Ran and the rest dropped their tools and hurried over to crowd me with questions. One asked whether it was the rat I had raised and why it had grown so vast. Another guessed it must be a different rat entirely. A third said it looked clumsy in the legs, and So Chan declared the bloodline of such a spirit beast was no simple thing. I only smiled and said nothing, letting them guess to their heart's content. Then I looked around at the lot of them and said I meant to go up to the outer sect soon, and asked who wished to come along. At once everyone but Oshin clamored to go. Oshin kept his face calm, but I could tell he burned underneath, murmuring that this was a fine chance. After a bout of squabbling, I settled on taking Ye Ran and So Qian, with the trip set 7 days out. Why 7 days and not sooner? Because I wanted to poke into the 8 sceneries grotto heaven first, and clear that business off my mind. Just then I turned toward the valley mouth, where a figure was walking in, and it was none other than Li Ya. The years had lent him a weathered coldness. His black robes snapped in the autumn wind, and the sword at his waist finished the picture of a proud, frosty swordsman that no stillness could hide. So Qian and the other 4 caught sight of him and went nervous. Anyone who came to Medicine Valley outranked them by default, and this man looked like someone not to be trifled with. I threw a probe across him and found he had already climbed to the 4th level of the Foundation Establishment realm. Truly fast. He well deserved to be the first man of protagonist's fate I had ever spotted. I walked over with the others trailing close behind. Li Ya swept his eyes across all of Medicine Valley, and when his gaze settled on me, he went a little dazed. Once I had trailed forever at the heels of others, and now I stood at the head of my own utility disciples. Things had truly changed. I came before him, cupped my hands and smiled that it had been a long time. Injured, I thought, the instant I felt his chi and blood churning chaotic and his breath running shallow. The marks of an internal wound were plain on him. He smiled back and agreed it had been many years, then asked where Master was, and where my senior brother and Meng Rang had gone. I answered helplessly that Master's lifespan had drawn to its end, so he had left a while ago. After his own departure, I said, my senior brother had quit the valley as well. As for Meng Rang, he had gone to sit the outer sect assessment and never come back. Hearing all this, Li Ya stood stunned. Behind me, So Qian and the rest whispered together, for they had roughly guessed his standing. Meng Rang used to speak of it plenty, saying a scion of Imperial Dynasty royalty had once served here as a utility disciple and called him brother. Li Ya sighed that it was down to me alone now. I asked whether he wanted to come into the pavilion and sit a while, and he nodded. Besides revisiting the old place, he'd come to heal his wounds, and only here did he feel any real safety. I led him toward the pavilion and signaled the others to keep clearing the leaves. All the way up, when his foot touched the stairs, his feelings crested and broke. He could not help a cough that left his face gray. Walking ahead of him, my own face shifted a fraction, for I had caught a faint ripple of soul off him. Good heavens, so this fellow truly had an old grandfather riding along inside him. I turned and asked with concern what was wrong, and he waved it off as nothing but an old injury. I told him at once to stay on. Then, since Medicine Valley had rooms to spare, he nodded and thanked me with a smile. Junior brother Go was as considerate as ever, he thought, and this time he simply had to repay me. The 2 of us went into the room, and once I had him seated I set water to boil for tea. His gaze wandered the room and was quickly snared by the azure vine fruit in the wooden cabinet. Over the past 3 days I had tucked most of the fruits into my storage pouch, leaving only 2 out. It kept the white spirit rat from stealing them. If the little beast really pilfered them I would not have the heart to kill it, and hiding the fruits was simpler than the grief. He narrowed his eyes at that fruit, but did not linger long before his stare came back to me. I could tell my bearing had caught him off guard. The old Goan had been handsome enough, he thought, yet had never worn this arresting air, steady and touched with something ethereal, like a great cultivator of the inner sect. Had he not felt for himself that my aura sat only at the 4th level of the chi refining realm, he might have doubted I was the man he knew. To keep the room from cooling, I asked after the life of an outer sect disciple, and Li Ya answered each question in turn. I asked whether becoming one truly meant completing a bounty mission every year, and he confirmed it, adding that it had to be an outside mission. I asked whether he had ever run into Yao demons. He laughed that he met them nearly every time he went out. The Taichang imperial dynasty was so vast that some corner of it was always being ravaged. The year before, he told me, he had almost died to a 3rd order Yao beast on par with the core formation realm. He had fought it beside several friends until one was killed and the rest fled with grievous wounds. A lingering fear crossed his face as he finished. 3rd order on par with core formation, I marveled with a click of my tongue, which chased the gloom out of his heart. He set to talking and laughing over the whole affair, and I listened as though to a fine story, feeding him plenty of feeling in return. In truth, I was curious, and when it ended I had only one thought. It was all far too dangerous, and I was blessed never to have become an outer sect disciple. He warned me that beyond Yao demons one had to guard against other cultivators too. Once, hunting a treasure, he had clashed with disciples of a rival sect and tangled with them half a month. He had finally managed to kill his man, he said, and then asked me to guess what came next. I guessed the fellow's father had come. Li Ya looked at me in surprise and shook his head. It was not the father, but near enough, he said, since the man's master had come. Good heavens, I thought, gladder than ever to have stayed clear of the outer sect. If the outer sect ran like this, the inner sect disciples faced graver perils still. He rolled on into the tale of outwitting that enemy master, and I sat through it like a child at a storyteller's stall, thoroughly entertained. When the water at last came to a boil, I rose to steep the tea, and Li Ya asked, offhand, whether the fruit in the cabinet was something master had left behind. With my back to him, I said I had found it outside. Had he forgotten, I asked, that the white spirit rat was a treasure-seeking rat? He raised his eyebrows at that, half wondering whether the beast could really sniff out treasure, and suddenly wanting one of his own. He hesitated a moment, then asked whether I could spare him a fruit to mend his wounds. He promised not to shortchange me and offered a secret manual or a magical artifact in trade. I turned, brought the tea over, set it down, and told him in a flat tone that I would simply give him one and wanted nothing back. After all that we were to each other, what was there to speak of? The words moved him deeply. Over his years in the outer sect, his friends had all been friends of interest, and no one had treated him so well and asked for nothing. I went to the cabinet, took out an azure vine fruit, and laid it beside his teacup, and the gesture shamed him further. He mocked himself in his heart that he had once looked down on me and on Medicine Valley both. Despite joining the outer sect, he had come crawling back in the end to be saved by me. Then he raised his hand and drew a precious sword from his storage pouch. The scabbard was cyan and inlaid with gems, worked with fine patterns, rich and gorgeous, its hilt seemingly coiled by a dark golden dragon. He set the sword on the table with a heavy ringing note. His mother had given it to him, he said softly, and he would gift it now to me, since one day it might save my life. The sword left me stunned. Though I saw only the scabbard, I could feel the power sleeping within it, for an Ascent Soul cultivator sees more than a man at Foundation establishment ever could. This was without question a divine weapon. Blasted, I had forgotten to set a timer, and this weather ran hot then cold with no warning at all. I waved my hands in a hurry and said I could not possibly take it. It was a sword his mother had left him, and how could I accept such a thing? I meant every word. A precious blade with a background this deep surely carried tangled origins, and nothing but trouble. Li Ya looked down at the scabbard, his thoughts drifting into old memory. The sword was named Heavenly Constellation, he told me, and had been at his side since he was 3 years old. Now he could no longer draw out its full power, nor felt himself worthy to wield it. It was better left here, where perhaps in Medicine Valley it might still wait for the one it was fated to meet. I asked, honestly baffled, why he called himself unworthy, and whether the sword had anything to do with the imperial family, since if it did, I would not dare touch it. The mere thought of getting entangled with the Li family gave me a headache. The blade was beautiful and I did want it, but I wanted an undisturbed life a great deal more. He looked at me and smiled that I would not understand even if he explained it, then set my worries aside. The sword would bring me no trouble, he swore. Even the people of the Li family would not dare seize it, since it had been a love token from the emperor to his mother. With it in my keeping, the Li family would not dare move against me on sight. If I ever met a trouble I could not resolve, I could carry the sword to Changnak and seek out his father, the emperor himself. I said a person of my low standing could hardly hope to meet the holy emperor. He told me not to worry. The instant Heavenly Constellation appeared in Changnak, his father would sense it, and in short, I had to accept it, or else he would not eat the fruit. Then don't eat it. I nearly blurted and swallowed the words just in time. I looked the sword over again. It occurred to me that I still owned no magical artifact of my own, for the whole of Zhong Hyundan's inheritance had been talisman papers, without a single blade among them. What was there to fear? I was an Ascent Soul cultivator. If I ever met a trouble past mending, I could simply hurl the sword at the man's head. So I drew a deep breath and reached out to take Heavenly Constellation. The blade carried real weight, and my right hand trembled as I lifted it, which set Li Ya laughing aloud. He told me in earnest that even with middling aptitude I must not neglect my daily cultivation, and must keep drilling the Li family 7 swords he had once passed to me. I held the sword in both hands and nodded with a stiff smile. The young man's eye for people still wanted a great deal of practice. So Li Ya settled into Medicine Valley, and I saw to a courtyard for him where no one would disturb his rest. He sat cross-legged on the bed with the half-eaten azure vine fruit beside him, forming seals with both hands and circling his energy to knit his wounds. A pale blue phantom rose out of his body and hung in the room. It was an old man of kind, benevolent face, his Taoist robe stirring faintly, the aura of a high expert leaking from every fold. Li Ya opened his eyes and asked the old man he called Old Ancestor what fruit this was, whose medicinal power ran so tyrannical. The soul-formed elder first waved a hand to set the room space rippling, then stroked his beard and smiled. It should be an azure vine fruit, he said, born of the sacred tree of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, a thing of at least the 6th grade, and Li Ya was fortunate indeed. Fruit from the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, Li Ya muttered. So the pavilion had rooted itself deep, and small wonder the Taehan sect named it their chief foe. The old ancestor gazed at the fruit and said the pavilion and the Taehan sect had nursed their grudge above 1,000 years, each burying pawns inside the other. So junior brother Go was lucky, he added, since had he not met Li Ya, the fruit would have brought him calamity. Li Ya shook his head and answered that it was not luck. I was kind and prized loyalty, he said, and men like me were always repaid in the end, so if anyone here was fortunate, it was himself. The old man nodded that this was true, and that such men were rare indeed in the world of cultivation. Yet Li Ya need not feel too guilty, since giving me Heavenly Constellation meant far more to me than the fruit ever would. At the mention of the blade, Li Ya sighed that he had failed his mother's hopes. He wanted no part of the fight for the throne, wishing only to avenge her and then wander the world, far from the court's struggles. The old ancestor told him that Heavenly Constellation was one of the 3 great imperial swords of the Grand Azure. To draw out its full might, he had to master the imperial sovereign sword technique, while his own astonishing 9 swords had reached only minor achievement. By the elder's reckoning, it would take another 100 years yet. Li Ya fell silent. The old man needled him that he could not even easily best that little fellow named Shi Yang, and needed to work harder since his 4th brother had already climbed to the Golden Core realm. Li Ya drew a long breath, stopped answering, shut his eyes, and went back to healing. The old ancestor turned his gaze to the window. Though the shutters were fast closed, he could hear Socheon and the others laughing outside. This was truly a fine place, he murmured, far from worldly strife, and a pity that those who carried a mission were fated never to suit it. Then he told himself he could sigh no more, and must return to sleep to nourish his spirit, and sank away. Late that night, Mystic Valley lay silent. I used the Dragon Force primordial art to bury my aura and slipped out of the valley without a sound, coming at last to a forest more than 20 miles off. I sat beneath a tree, called up my panel, and locked my eyes on the Li family 7 swords, weighing how many years of lifespan to sink into it. After long thought, I chose to spend a touch more and lift my true fighting strength. 2,000 years, I settled. Once this outlay was done, I could go back to hoarding my span in peace until it reached 100,000. So I fed 2,000 years into the art. The instant the thought fixed, the leading digit of my lifespan slid from a 4 down to a 2. The readouts began at once inside my mind. I had invested 2,000 years of lifespan to evolve and practice the Li family 7 swords. 10 years of practice carried my sword work to major achievement and set me contemplating deeper possibilities. By 50 years, my technique struck its pinnacle, and the 7 swords advanced into the 7-sword formula. 300 years brought that formula to its own pinnacle and pushed it into the astonishing 9 swords. 500 years lifted the 9 swords to major achievement, while I condensed a sword intent of my own. At 1,000 years, the astonishing 9 swords returned to simplicity and became the imperial sovereign sword technique. By 1,200 years, my sword intent had condensed its own heaven and earth imperial chi, and my grasp of the Tao of the sword deepened. At 1,800 years, the imperial sovereign sword technique returned to simplicity. My sword intent triggered the Tao of the sword itself, and I fell into epiphany. The art advanced into the Grand Azure startling divine sword. At the full 2,000 years, it reached mastery, and my understanding of the sword climbed higher yet. The notifications had spilled out one after another. When the tally hit 1,000 years, I threw up the lifespan barrier in haste, afraid of alerting the mysterious thing underground and the soul lodged inside Li Ya. When the last readout faded, a vast flood of memory poured into my mind. The ground churned with spiritual chi that did not enter me but wheeled around me instead. Within it, wisps of cold light gathered like sword gleam, shimmering with an eerie sheen in the dark. I sank into epiphany, and how long passed I could not say. But when I gradually surfaced, dawn had not yet broken. I looked first at what the barrier had cost me. Good heavens! Comprehending the art alone had eaten 300 years of my lifespan. Still, I had wholly mastered the grand azure startling divine sword, and my grasp of the Tao of the sword had reached the transcendent. It was a profound feeling that left me in a wonderful mood. Looking again at the panel, I saw the Li family 7 swords in the Ultimate Arts column had turned into the Grand Azure Startling Divine Sword, with the word Mastery noted beside it. I did not rise yet. I drew out Heavenly Constellation, laid the scabbard flat across my knees, pressed both hands to it, and shut my eyes to feel out the sword's intent. Once the blade's intent merged with my own, I would be able to subdue this precious thing. Inside it lay restrictions, and no few of them standing like spell checkpoints that waited for the master to break through with divine sense and spiritual power. I did not understand restrictions, yet my own sword intent had already formed, and it slid straight through them. Half an hour on I stood, tossed Heavenly Constellation back into my storage pouch, and set off for Mystic Valley. With a single step I floated up, sword chi condensing beneath my feet, and rode the sword away. When I came within 10 miles of the valley I dropped down and went on afoot, crushing my aura to the last thread. The night thinned out and the eastern sky took on a wash of pink as morning arrived. Li Ya pushed open his door, faced the rising sun, and stretched, feeling clean and refreshed. The fruit's medicine had been fierce beyond words. He no longer ached so, sure he would be whole again in a few more days. He smiled, and his gaze drifted to the grass beside the far garden where I was leading the juniors through their exercises. Those slow sets of movements set him wondering. Gentle as they were, he could not shake the feeling that some depth lay hidden in them. He came over to my side and I greeted him, and he nodded, then asked, curious, what we were practicing. I answered with a smile that I had learned it from an old man in my childhood. It strengthened the body and kept the mind well, I said, and I led them in it each morning so they could open the day in good spirits. No Guga grumbled that he found it useless. So Chan glared and told him that was only because his aptitude was dull, and Li Ya put in that it was useful in truth, so long as one kept at it over years. Coming from an outer sect disciple, the verdict naturally convinced them. I glanced at Li Ya and thought he had softened, that he could now speak such tactful, warm-hearted words. In fact, my whole reason for the drills was to pry the juniors' minds clean off cultivation and its dreams, so they would stop trampling my flowers and herbs. He offered, chuckling, to teach them a set of sword techniques once they finished. So Chan and the rest went wild with excitement, thanking him over and over and calling him Senior Brother Li again and again. Then he looked at me and said I should join too, since I had a sword in hand now and ought to drill more. I nodded with a smile and told him fine, that he could test whether I had practiced my Li family 7 swords properly. His joining lifted the mood higher still, and watching the juniors carry on he felt not annoyed but glad. It was not until noon that he drew me off into the forest. He asked in earnest to see my Li family 7 swords, for once I truly entered the gate he could pass me the real techniques, since this set was only the basic moves. In the forest I could not refuse him, and so I ran through a clumsy set of the Li family 7 swords. There I learned that feigning clumsiness was harder work than feigning skill. Faced with my stiff, stumbling forms, Li Ya scolded me a good while, then patiently set about teaching me how to hold and swing a sword. From his own moves I could judge that he was already cultivating the astonishing 9 swords. That marked him a genius, or at the least a man whose talent for the blade far outran mine. When the next day came, he still meant to haul me out to drill, and I simply could not bear it. I told him helplessly that I had no gift for the sword and we should let it go. My life spanned only a few decades, I said, and it would be a waste to spend them in bitter practice. Against sword work, I would far rather plant and water my flowers. As I spoke, I quietly turned the dragon chi in my body up into my eyes until they reddened. Li Ya, standing there with his sword, saw my reddened eyes and felt a sudden tightness grip his chest. What was he doing? He asked himself. Repaying junior brother Go in the manner he himself preferred. Was that not simply another shape of harm? He could not help recalling his own childhood, when his imperial father forced him to study alongside his royal brothers. However hard he strained, he could never master the things they mastered with ease. He sighed, walked up, laid a hand on my shoulder, and told me it had been thoughtless of him, and that he was sorry. I forced a smile and said it was fine, that he had only been thinking of my good, and that the fault was mine for being incapable and short of aptitude. The more I played it so, the guiltier he grew. We sat down together and fell to talking of my first year in the valley, and the tension of the sword work thinned and blew away. In the days that followed, Li Ya stopped pestering me over the sword, though he still gave an hour a day to teaching So-chan and the others. For juniors whose dreams had not yet gone out, the chance to learn from an outer sect disciple was a rare gift. 5 days on, he made ready to leave. I led the juniors to see him off at the valley mouth, and So-chan and the rest were loath to part with him, for they had learned so much at his hand. I told him with a reluctant face that this would always be his home, and that he should come back and visit often. Home, the word sent a ripple through Lia's heart, though his face stayed light and easy as he answered that he would come back. With that he turned and left. In his black robes he looked like a cluster of dark flame burning through the mountain forest, a fire the bleak autumn wind could not put out. I sensed some fighting spirit kindling in him, and guessed it tied back to this wound of his. I waited until Li Ya had vanished into the depths of the forest before I drew my gaze in. Then I turned to the juniors and smiled. I told them to cultivate well, to find Senior Brother Li in the outer sect soon, and to bring glory to our mystic valley. No Guga at once made a grand declaration and swore he would enter the outer sect. So Chion said the same, though his confidence plainly ran thinner, and Ye-Ran stood lost in her own thoughts. Then O-Shin spoke up and said he would not go to the outer sect at all, but wanted to stay at Great Master's side the rest of his life. Everyone turned to stare at him in surprise, myself among them. This child, I thought, a bit moved despite myself, wondering whether I had misjudged O-Shin all along. He had been so well behaved of late, no longer creeping about at night, and Mystic Valley had lost nothing, so for now I could not brand him a man of ill intent. In that case, I would simply hand him more chores in the days ahead. Yi-Ran was left regretful, wondering how O-Shin had beaten her to the words. She realized besides that Great Master weighed heavy in her heart, yet not as heavy as cultivating toward a long life. No Guga could not resist jeering that O-Shin was a bootlicker, and for a spell the four of them were bickering all over again. I led them back into the valley, my thoughts already drifting underground, for with Li Ya gone it was time to settle the trouble beneath us. Late that night, in the 8 Sceneries Grotto Heaven, I came with the heavenly constellation scabbard in hand, to Mang Rang, who still lay on the grass with his 7 orifices sealed by soil. There were signs of disturbance in the grass around him. I saw at once, so someone truly had been here. Ordinary cultivation would find such traces hard to catch, but I could read them because I had marked the ground deliberately the last time I left. I gripped the sword and stepped toward the cave mouth from which Mang Rang had once run out, and soon the darkness swallowed me. The passage held few crystals and ran very dim, yet to a divine sense at the nascent soul realm the dark was nothing. A cold spiritual wind blew through the tunnel and stirred my robes, while my divine sense had already reached the far end. It opened into a spacious chamber, not so vast as the main hall of the grotto heaven, yet far from small. Coffins stood upright there, and a blue-green crystal the size of a water vat was set into the ceiling. And under that eerie light the coffins looked ghastly. Beyond the coffins there was nothing else. My divine sense caught a living person lying in one of them, a faint thread of life chi that could not slip past an ascent soul cultivator's senses. Though I felt no danger off it, I did not loosen my guard. I went forward a long while before I reached the passage's end, then stood at the entrance, poked my head in with care, and asked warily whether anyone was there. No one answered, as though the chamber held no soul at all. I picked a stone off the ground and flung it inside, and it cracked against a coffin that did not so much as shift. I widened my eyes, staged a start, and shrank back as if terrified. Why was there still no sound? I fretted, since if I kept up this act much longer it would only grow awkward. I was making all this fuss to sound out that being's temper. It had not harmed me before, and I had no wish to kill an innocent by mistake, at the very least needing to be able to face myself afterward. So I gritted my teeth, suddenly drew the sword, and rushed in slashing wildly. Heavenly constellation bit into a coffin lid and stuck fast. I hauled at it, and the pull threw my own body 2 staggering steps back. A soft laugh rang out then, jarring in that chamber, and it nearly raised the hairs on my neck. It was a woman's voice, and on first hearing it sounded like some female ghost's giggle. I held the sword and swept my eyes around, spinning without pause, dreading that some monster or specter might lunge from the side. The voice asked whether I was Zhang Hyundan's disciple. I answered quickly that I was, that Zhang Hyundan was my master, and asked who she was and why she was here. The one who could be here was naturally my Grand Master, she said, since Zhang Hyundan was her disciple, and my being able to come in meant his time was surely up. So it was my Grand Master, I said, and greeted her. Master's time had indeed come, I told her, for he had said he was following her own example, seeking a place unknown to anyone to meet the end of his life. The chamber fell silent. I stayed on guard, for if she meant to strike at me, Grand Master or no, I would not stay my hand. Heavenly constellation had not yet tasted blood. After a long while, just as my patience was fraying and I was about to speak, her voice came again and asked whether Zhang Hyundan had told me who she was. I answered low that Master had told me everything. She was of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, and he had bidden me stand ready to receive the pavilion's people at any time. She teased that, timid and cowardly and so cautious on the way in, I had plainly not come here of my own will. Had I learned all this only after he handed me the Valley Master's seat? She asked. I sighed and left it all unsaid, for this time I was not acting at all, but truly helpless. Since I had taken him as master, she went on, I was naturally her disciple's disciple, and I need only guard here another 10 years. After that, she would leave the Taeon sect and bring me no trouble. I could not help asking her name. Her surname was Gang, and her given name Gyeong, she said, and her title in the world of cultivation was not worth the mention. Gang Gyeong, I thought. A pleasant enough name, though I had no notion how many years she had lived. While I was still thinking, a coffin ahead of me swung open and startled my sword up. Two things flew out to land before me. A small black bell and a secret manual. The bell was a meeting gift to her disciple's disciple, she said. A soul-shaking bell that could drive every art of the myriad gu mystic arts. With one shake, all the corpse goo in this chamber would obey me. The manual held her own cultivation method. The yin and yang manual, which contained the way to refine the soul-shaking bell. A thing even my master had never learned. Her voice sounded a touch weary as she spoke. I bowed and thanked her at once, then could not stop myself from asking why, with my mediocre aptitude, she was being so good to me. She laughed that mediocre aptitude was a poor jest. Whatever strange art I practiced, my true cultivation was surely no mere fourth level of chi refining, and I had to already stand at foundation establishment. To reach it so young made me a genius, she said. To swallow my own arrogance and hide as a utility disciple showed a rare sense. For whatever I carried, I plainly bore no love for the Taehyun sect. My aptitude satisfied her, she said, and my manner of doing things pleased her more, so I should cultivate well and she would later pass me more spells. When I inherited her mantle, she would present me to the Thousand Autumns Pavilion as a true disciple. Then she took up her charming laugh again, and my face shifted, for I felt seen straight through and could not save any face at all. I drew a deep breath and thanked her, saying that if Grandmaster had any orders she might tell me at any time. Then I bent, gathered up the soul-shaking bell and the yin and yang manual, and turned to leave, and her voice did not sound again in the chamber. I hurried back to the grotto heaven, sat cross-legged beneath the tree, and began to leaf through the manual, weighing whether Gangyong meant me harm. If it was only 10 years, I had nothing to fear, since I stood at the nascent soul realm and had mastered the Grand Azure startling divine sword besides. She was plainly no kind soul, only wary of what she took for my foundation establishment strength. In a mere 10 years, she could hardly leap from guarding against foundation establishment to killing an ascent soul cultivator with a flick of her hand. Nor was she simply hiding here, for by Jong Hyundan's account, she had been dead 70 years. Across these 10 years, I would find ways to draw more spells and manuals out of her. After that, if she left cleanly, I would not betray my master or forsake my forebears. If she meant harm, then I could only let heavenly constellation taste a little blood. Now, what to eat for lunch? Spring gave way to autumn, and 5 years slipped past in a breath. Across those years, I held to my plan of sinking 1 year of lifespan every night, spending above 1,800 years in all. My cultivation had climbed to the 8th level of the nascent soul realm. Past the 5th level, the time each minor realm demanded rose steeply, and while evolving, I could only train hard alongside it, which stretched the work longer. I had above 10,200 years of lifespan left now, for the 8 sceneries grotto heaven had lifted my yearly income. In those 5 years, 3 more utility disciples had joined Mystic Valley, all become my students, 2 boys and a girl. In age from eldest to youngest, they were Dang Wu, Sohan, and Gyeon Jin. I no longer chose by aptitude, but picked disciples of middling talent so as to court no trouble. Their greatest spans ran near 200 years, and on that footing I did my best to choose ones I found agreeable. On this day at the valley mouth, So Cheon, Ye Ran, O Shin, Dang Wu, Sohan, and Gyeonjin all crowded around No Guga. Today he was to set out for the outer sect and sit its assessment. One wished him success, another begged him not to forget them once he was up there. No Guga swore he would look after Medicine Valley, and one of them threatened to laugh at him if he failed. I had cut an azure vine fruit into 4 pieces and shared them among the 4 eldest juniors, which sent their cultivation surging. No Guga, above all, had been first to reach the 9th level of chi refining. It bears saying that ever since eating the fruit, O Shin had turned wholly obedient. He cultivated in peace each night in his own room instead of roaming the ridges, and grew more diligent at his tasks besides. The 23-year-old No Guga was in soaring spirits. He looked toward the pavilion where his senior brother lived, saw me standing at the window watching him, and warmth spread through his chest. He swore aloud to wait for his good news, that he would not let his senior brother down, and then turned and left. Leaning on the withered wind leg he had drilled for years, he felt he could make a name in the outer sect. dressed in black robes over a white ground. I watched him go from afar with a tangle of feeling. I could not tell whether it was gratification or reluctance, and thought it was perhaps a measure of both. Here I was only 27. I laughed at myself, and already so sentimental. What would I be at 200, at 2,000, at even 20,000 years old? I turned back to the table, sat, took up the Travels of the Azure Wanderer, and went on savoring it. It was the fresh release of the year before, in my view an absolute peak masterpiece, whose author wrote romance with a skill that had reached the transcendent realm. An hour later, Ocean came to call. At 21, he still dressed as a monk, and I often teased him as a jade-faced holy pilgrim, all the more once he put on the monk's robes I had specially cut for him. He came to my side and said softly that the gardens on the mountain were all watered, and asked whether I had any other orders for the day. His gaze slipped to the Travels of the Azure Wanderer, and his fair, handsome face went red on the instant. Without lifting my eyes, I told him there was nothing else and to go cultivate. He crossed to the far side of the table and did not leave, hovering there with a hesitant look, and I glanced up and asked whether there was anything more. In my black robes, I already carried the pressing air of a man above others. The harvests had been good these years, and I kept no private hoard, so I had paid out of pocket to clothe everyone in Medicine Valley anew, and none of them looked like utility disciples now. Oh, Shin ground his teeth and said that, to speak plainly, with his aptitude it was impossible for him to join the outer sect. He truly wished to stay in Medicine Valley and keep me company all his life. Was the meaning under those words not clear enough? He wanted to rise. I frowned and put on a troubled face, and seeing it he grew anxious and dropped straight to his knees. He asked, his voice climbing and his eyes reddening, what exactly he lacked. He was more diligent than the others and more obedient than the others, he said, and they all wished to go to the outer sect while he alone did not. I saw that he had quietly stirred some cultivation art to make his chi and blood surge. Good lad, I thought. So you mean to mimic me? I spoke to him in earnest, telling him that in my heart there was no better man and no worse. Just as I had split the fruit evenly among them all, so I weighed them evenly. Yet the seat of senior disciple carried great weight, standing near enough for the next valley master. Though I was only a utility disciple, my treatment already matched an ordinary outer sect disciple's, so I had to be grateful for the sect's favor. He seemed to be hiding something from me, I added, and everyone had unspeakable hardships he need not spell out. He would always be my junior brother, I said, but the senior disciple's seat, and there I sighed and let my face go helpless. Oh Shin was stunned, for he had never dreamed that his doings from years back had long since fallen under his senior brother's eye. His first reaction was panic, his second a rush of feeling. His last midnight snooping had been 5 whole years ago, and his senior brother had borne with him 5 years. What did that mean, he thought, but that his senior brother truly counted him one of his own. Putting himself in my place, he judged that had he sat where I sat, he would long ago have punished such a junior harshly. The more he turned it over, the more ashamed he grew, until he could not keep up the act. He ground his teeth as though gathering some great resolve, and began to say that, in truth, and then it came out. He had come from the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, he said, and his father was one of the 72 pavilion masters. His own aptitude was dull, so his brothers and sisters had bullied him the year round until he fled. He had crept about at night because he had heard of senior brother Li Ya's exploits and hoped to find some opportunity, some way one day to prove himself to his father. But he had given that up now, for set beside not only his siblings but even no Guga he fell far, far short. He said it all in one breath and lowered his head at the end, not daring to look at me. I let shock and disbelief cross my face and started to say his name and let it hang. Hearing his senior brother's voice tremble, Oshin bowed his forehead hard to the ground, more ashamed still. In truth, I had never expected Oshin to hail from the Thousand Autumns Pavilion. What sort of business was this, I thought, since we might as well stop calling the place Mystic Valley and call it Thousand Autumns Valley instead. I quietly spread my divine sense and wove an unseen barrier so no one could eavesdrop. I sat silent a while, then let out a heavy sigh and told him to get up and speak first. And the anxious Oshin let out a quiet breath of relief. He rose and saw the tangle on my face and was moved all the more, sure that his senior brother truly did treat him well. I said I knew little of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, and had heard it was a demonic path sect. He nodded that it was the demonic path indeed, the most evil of them, master of corpse Tao and goo arts, and soul-snatching and poisons in every foul craft the demonic path owned. He could no longer bear to stay, he said, and so he had fled. Then would his father come looking for him? I asked with concern, since I had to think of the other disciples. He waved his hands quickly and said his father could hardly come hunting, for the man wished him dead already, his greatest disgrace. At that my face eased a little, and I chided him that I would not have him belittle himself so. For how could one judge a man's worth by his cultivation? He scratched his head and laughed that he knew, but the pavilion was the demonic path, and its people were not normal folk. I nodded, Then, recalling something, asked whether he had ever heard the name Gang Gyeong in the pavilion. Gang Gyeong, he echoed, startled, and frowned in thought. After a few moments it came to him, and he said he remembered now. She had been the foremost genius of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion 100 years ago, and the daughter of its second pavilion master, though she had been dead many years. He had heard his father speak of her in his childhood, he said, when his father had even wished to wed his eldest brother to Gang Gyeong. Hearing that, I could not help asking how old his father was. The man was nearly 500, he answered, with above 100 children, so that even a lost son went unmissed. I fell silent, thinking privately that the demonic path's way of living was rather enviable. I put a few more questions to him, but sadly, Oh Shin knew little else of Gang Yang. Since he had confessed his origin, I told him I would raise him to senior disciple. If I could trade a valley's senior disciple seat to turn a demonic cultivator toward a new leaf, that would count as a fine strand of karma. But the matter could not be aired for now, and he would have to win over the whole valley by his own showing. Oh Shin was overjoyed. As he made to thank me, I went on to warn him. From this day he must not breathe a word of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, not even alone in private. This was the Taehyun sect, and even talking to oneself might be overheard. He nodded quickly and obeyed, and the two of us turned the talk to other small matters. He felt closer to his senior brother than ever, and grateful, sure he ought to have confessed to me long ago. That night, in the 8 Sceneries Grotto Heaven, I walked to an open patch beside the underground river and set to sowing medicinal herbs. My hands moved unhurried. For a man who seldom cultivated, I found real pleasure in the sowing, since what I planted was not merely flowers and herbs, but life itself. A love of farming ran in a Chinese man's very bones, and the habit had followed my soul into this world of cultivation. When I had finished, I looked over my newly opened garden with satisfaction, so neat it held a beauty all its own. Then Gang Yong's melodious voice called from within a cave mouth, bidding her good grand disciple come in a moment, and I went over at once. Over these years, she summoned me now and again to help pick herbs, and even to work alchemy. I had not toiled for nothing, for in the doing my alchemy improved by leaps, since hers far outstripped Zhang Hyundan's, as her teaching plainly showed. The chamber was dim as ever, a pill furnace half a man's height standing on the open floor with coal ash heaped beneath it. I was about to speak when I caught a stir, and looking close, I saw a coffin in the depths begin to tremble. Its lid crashed to the floor and kicked up a cloud of dust. A hand crawled from the upright coffin, skinny and bony as a ghost's claw, so I cast a lifespan probe over it at once. The readout named Gang Yong, 9th layer of the Golden Core realm, her present age 185, her current span 304, and her ceiling 2,490. Good heavens, nearly 2,500 years of maximum lifespan. How did the 9th layer of Golden Core carry only some 300 years of span, I wondered, baffled, and whether it might tie to her injuries. With the question, the last shred of my wariness drained away. A withered foot stepped out of the coffin and came down on a lump of charcoal, snapping it. The one who emerged was a ragged woman with hair in wild disarray, her frame so cruelly thin it seemed her flesh and blood had been wrung out of her. Her robe was barely recognizable as white, its sleeves and trouser legs in tatters, and she walked out unsteadily like a vengeful ghost. Gang Gyeong slowly lifted her face, its features as withered as the rest of her, the sockets sunk deep and the eyes bulging, a truly ghastly sight. When her gaze fell on me, I hurried to drop my head. She forced a smile that only made her more horrific, turbid air puffing from her mouth, and thanked her good disciple grandchild. With my 5 years of help at the furnace, she said she had mended quite fast. She no longer called herself this seat but simply I, which drew our footing a good deal closer. I swallowed my discomfort and told her it was no more than a disciple grandchild's duty, though I did have one question. Ask, she bid me, while she trembled her way toward the pill furnace. I asked why, since alchemy sped her recovery so, she had never had my master work the furnace for her before. Zhang Hyundan had believed her dead, 70 years, meaning she had hidden here 70 years, and he had never once found her out. She smiled without warmth and said it was because she had not trusted him. My master had been forced into becoming her disciple, his heart forever wavering, and who could say when he might have turned on her. Half the coffins in this chamber belonged to disciples he had taken in. I fell silent, for I believed her, since that was exactly the fate that had come to Mang Rang. She settled before the furnace and waved a hand, sending the heaps of herbs flying into it, then asked what level of the Foundation establishment realm I had reached in 5 years. My surface cultivation sat at the 5th level of chi refining, but she was convinced I stood at Foundation establishment, so I answered that I was nearly at the 3rd level. Too slow, she said, and told me not to neglect my daily cultivation. In her day, she had achieved Foundation establishment at 18, and core formation at 40. Had she not spent decades sunk in the paths of alchemy and formations, she would already stand at Nascent's soul. Then she asked whether I had ever heard of the Nascent Soul Realm. I nodded quickly and said the Nascent Soul Realm was the province of immortals, seldom glimpsed in the outer sect. She scoffed that they were no immortals but merely stronger cultivators. Once she had fully recovered, she would seek out a place to force a breakthrough into the Nascent Soul Realm, so that I would gain one more Nascent Soul backer. Did that not excite me? She asked. The last of it carried on a smug note. Her voice ran charming, a stark clash against her horrific face. I stepped up and asked whether there was anything she needed of me. She told me only to stay at her side and watch how she worked the furnace, so we might talk, and waved me down to sit beside her. I sat, but kept my distance and my inner guard. However well she treated me, I would not lower it until she was gone, for Mang Rang stood as a warning that he had likely never suspected Zhong Hyundan even at his death. She asked after my background, and I did not hide it, sketching the first half of my life in broad strokes. I left out the Ji clan, and said only that I had been a servant who joined the Taehyun sect once a spiritual root was found in me. We talked a full hour before she let me go, telling me to come and wait the next 3 nights, and promising a great reward once the work was done. I came as arranged. On the 3rd night I sat cross-legged across from the furnace, with the yin and yang manual in hand, putting questions to her now and then. She grew vexed and scolded whether I was playing the fool with her, since a boy who reached Foundation establishment so young could hardly have such dull comprehension. I said, all aggrieved, that alchemy was alchemy, and drawing in chi was drawing in chi. She was left with nothing to say, her attention snapping suddenly back to the furnace. The heat rising off the furnace mounted, and the steam vents in its lid turned a dark green, an eerie thing to see. A chill crawled down my spine, and I wondered what pill she was refining, for it felt for all the world like a poison pill. Excitement showed in Gang Gyeong's eyes, and she stopped speaking and kept them locked on the furnace. Time crept by second while I stayed on guard against any sudden strike from her. How long passed I could not tell, but at last a muffled sound came from inside the furnace. A smile broke across her face, a smile uglier than weeping. She raised her right hand, put out 2 fingers, and the lid flew off. Her hand grabbed after it, so that a pill shot from the furnace and dropped into her palm, and the moment it touched her, she flung it straight into her mouth. So fast, I thought, as though she feared I might snatch it from her. Having swallowed the pill, Gang Yong sat cross-legged at once and set her energy circling, and within 3 breaths wisps of white steam rose off her body. I stood and drew slowly back, keeping my distance. The steam thickened and swirled about her until her shape blurred, and at a glance she looked like a corpse standing in white fog. I kept checking her lifespan, on guard lest she abruptly step into the Nascent Soul Realm. Her current span began to climb. It was the first time I had ever watched a person's lifespan rise before my eyes, laid out in plain figures, and the sight rather shook me. I grew suddenly keen to know her pill, wondering what miraculous medicine it could be. Not only did her span rise, but her aura rose with it, soon crusting past the Foundation establishment realm into that of a true core formation cultivator. I marked keenly how her physical body was mending, her frame filling out steadily as though a balloon were being blown up. She had her tricks, I thought, and waited on in patience. Little by little, her breathing echoed through the cave, growing heavier and heavier until at last it sounded like the roar of a wild beast. After a long while, her panting broke off all at once. I saw her realm had not crossed into Nascent Soul, so my nerves eased. In the white mist she stretched, showing a graceful figure, a wholly different person from the wreck of before. She walked out of the fog, still disheveled and ragged, yet beneath the tatters were patches of fair skin. In the dim cave my face heated, and I could not help turning my gaze away. It had been so long since she walked like this, she said in a wistful tone. She came all the way to me, leaned in, brushed her hair aside with both hands, and asked her good disciple grandchild how she looked. I stole a glance. Though her face was smeared with grime, by her features she was plainly a rare beauty. In all my experience, only the Ji clan's 3rd young miss, Ji Hya-woo, and the outer sect disciple Lee Hyun-yu could stand beside her. I cupped my hands and said sincerely that Grandmaster was of course a peerless beauty, but that this disciple grandchild cared more for her condition, and asked whether her injuries had fully healed. If they had, I thought, then hurry up and go. It was still too early for a full recovery, she smiled, and she would need to rest another 5 years, her bright eyes sizing me up, and who knew what turned behind them. Then all at once she struck a palm at me, swift as a bolt, and halted it just before my chest, the sharp wind dragging my robes back wildly. Why had I not dodged? She asked with a smirk, and I kept my face stiff and said I had not had time to react. That was not the truth of it. In my eyes her movement had crawled, and in a blink my dragon strength could have knocked her chi aside. She had stopped short not to spare my life, but to save her own. Gang Gyeong could not help laughing, swaying with it, and in the end clutching her stomach, while I watched without cutting in. When she had laughed her fill, she told me not to fret, that she would never kill her own descendant. Back in the day when Jong Hyun-dan meant to betray her, she had spared his life and even borrowed his cover to hide within the Taeyeon sect. So long as I showed her filial respect, she would never fail me, and would not stand idle if anyone bullied me. I could not help laughing at that. She walked before the furnace, turned to me, and told me to leave a set of new clothes and go back now, and to come again tomorrow night, when she would teach me a spell. I drew a set of my white robes from my storage pouch, laid them gently on the ground, then raised my hands to bow and took my leave. After I had melted into the dark, Gang Gyeong turned and walked to the white robes. She lifted them through the air with a raised hand, breathed in the scent on them, and chuckled to herself. In the early morning, I was leading the people of Medicine Valley through their exercises, when a figure came up to the valley mouth, and it was Lee Ya. He was in black still, and set against 5 years ago his edge had climbed higher, the aura of a true powerhouse pouring off him, so that his arrival snatched every eye at once. So Chan cried out in surprise that it was senior brother Lee Ya. I walked toward him and told the others to keep on with their drills, then came before him and made to speak, but he cut me off and said we should talk upstairs. Something was up, I thought, and a nervousness took me, for what could be worth Lee Ya coming in person? I led him to the pavilion, and once we were up the stairs and into the room, I shut the door. He crossed to the table, raised his hand in a small motion, and an azure vine fruit appeared upon it, which left me staring. 4 years back, he said with a smile, an azure vine fruit had surfaced in the outer sex alchemy hall, and he had bought it. His heavy load of tasks, though, had never let him bring it to me. My face went strange. What was wrong? Lee Ya asked, and feeling I could not hide it, I gave a false cough and admitted that I was the one who had sold this very fruit to the alchemy hall. To dodge any suspicion, I had let it go cheap, which had the hall's elder praising my gratitude toward the sect. I had dared sell it because Lee Ya himself had once told me the azure vine fruit was no rare thing in the Taeyeon sect. Though the outer sect held none, the inner sect held plenty, since the inner sect kept the treasures of the whole world. Never had I dreamed he would go and buy it back. Lee Ya said helplessly what a mess it was. The fruit strengthened blood and chi and was a most rare heaven and earth treasure, he said. And how could I have sold it, and for how many spirit stones? 20 medium-grade spirit stones, I said. What, he cried, his eyes going wide when he had spent 10 high-grade, and 1 high-grade spirit stone was worth 100 medium-grade. We both sank into silence. In truth, I did not feel the loss. On the strength of that fruit, I had struck up a good friendship with Ju Cheong-no of the Alchemy Hall. Over the 4 years since, he had looked after me well and smoothed a great many paths. Facing Lee Ya, though, I felt a touch awkward all the same. Never mind, he said softly. Let us simply count it a contribution to the sect. Besides this fruit, there was another matter he had come to find me for. Lee Ya found me while I was dusting soil off my hands, and the first thing I did was pray that whatever he wanted would not be troublesome. I had no interest in getting swept into the vortex of feuds that churned through the outer sect. He only smiled and asked whether I still liked planting things, then reminded me that I already looked after an outer sect disciple's immortal cave. There was, he said, another opening of the same kind. Manage a cave for a year, and I would earn 1 mid-grade spirit stone along with a bottle of spiritual chi pills. Hearing that it was merely this, I let out a breath and felt the tension drain out of my shoulders. I would never refuse anything that could earn me lifespan, and since I rarely bothered to cultivate in the open, my days were mostly empty anyway. I asked whose cave it was, and Lee Ya did not hide it from me. The employer was a close friend of his, and the cave sat near the outer sex city. Once I agreed, he took me there without delay. He flew on his sword using the sword kinesis technique, and I stood behind him on the same blade. Our departing figures left So Cheon and Ye Ran staring after us with open envy. Who among the juniors did not dream of riding a sword through the clouds? The tall Dang Wu sighed that if only their master could learn the technique from senior brother Lee Ya and pass it down, how wonderful life would be. Beside him, the thin and handsome Sohan nodded along. He had spent 4 years in the Medicine Valley, yet the outer sect still gleamed in his heart, and Dang Wu and Gyeonjin felt the very same pull. Ye Ran said little and simply tugged Gyeonjin back toward their courtyard to cultivate. High above the mountains, Lee Ya's sword tore forward with startling speed, his black clothes snapping and his hair streaming behind him. He told me, in that earnest way of his, that my Medicine Valley now held more utility disciples than before. He urged me to recruit fewer of them and pour my spirit stones into my own cultivation instead. I always claimed my talent was poor, but he refused to believe there was no hope left in me. He did not want to stand in the prime of his life a century from now while I had already withered into old age. He had made many useful acquaintances over his years in the Taeyeon sect, yet in his heart none of them measured up to me. I was, he insisted, the only person who treated him well while expecting nothing in return, and he did not want to lose such a friendship. I smiled and told him not to worry, that I recruited more disciples only because my gardens had grown and the herbs I handed over each year kept increasing. The alchemy hall was steadily improving my treatment, so I would never abandon cultivation. A smile broke across his face at that, and he said I was a diligent kid who always managed to produce results. I answered that I could hardly compare with him, whose name rang through the whole outer sect, so the two of us traded flattery back and forth, and though Li Ya normally despised such empty courtesies, hearing them from me left him strangely pleased. 2 hours later, he set me back down in the Mystic Valley and rose away on his sword. The moment my feet touched the ground, Sohan and Gyeonjian swarmed me, curious about where I had been, and I told them a few words before shooing them off. No Guga's departure had lit a fire under the whole valley. The place had grown much quieter, since every disciple with a free moment now hid away in their room, straining to catch up to the pace he had set. I returned to my own room, picked up the yin and yang art, and began to read. That very night, Gang Gyeong would start teaching me spells, and I could hardly wait, for what cultivator ever complained of knowing too many? I lacked a great many of the basics besides. Late that night, in the 8 sceneries grotto heaven, Gang Gyeong stood beneath the azure vine tree in white robes with her black hair loose. She looked like a fairy come down among mortals, though her beautiful face was pinched with irritation. She demanded to know why I was so stupid, since she had explained the method of circulating chi several times already, and I still could not remember it. She kept her eyes locked on the black chi coiling in my hand. She was teaching me the soul-snatching technique, a spell that could tear a person's soul loose and was sinister to the extreme. I answered her helplessly, asking how long she had truly been teaching me, and begging her for a little patience. She started to protest, then faltered, unsure of what to say. Before she had begun recovering her body, she had looked forward to instructing me, since in her eyes I was a genius, yet the reality kept confounding her. This kid, she thought, was simply too bizarre. Teach me the sword kinesis technique and I grasped it in an instant, but hand me anything else and I stumbled like a man who had never walked the path of cultivation at all. Where the Tao of the sword was concerned, I was the strongest prodigy she had ever laid eyes upon, and the trouble was only that she herself had never been good at the sword. I sighed and asked her if I could learn everything so easily, whether I would have ever ended up a lowly utility disciple. She held her tongue for a long moment, then blurted out that it still did not mean I had to be this stupid. My hand jerked at the words. She truly was a creature of the demonic path, because her tongue cut far too deep. My temper flared, and I told her that I had my own strengths, and that in raw talent for the Tao of the sword she might not even best me. Rather than take offense, she brightened, and with a smile she asked whether we should test it, sparring with sword moves alone and no spiritual power at all. I agreed at once. The black chi in my hand scattered as I rose, ready to teach her a proper lesson. Gang Gang slid 2 steps aside, raised her right hand, and pressed her index and middle fingers together. She smiled that since it was only a spar, we ought not wound our harmony, so fingers would serve as swords. I nodded, left hand tucked behind my back and right hand forward. Her eyes thinned, and for some reason a flush of unease rose in her when I lifted my hand. She cursed herself silently, wondering why a foundation establishment kid should frighten her, and mourning how she had become so useless after losing the old arrogance that once looked down upon all creation. Then she stabbed her fingers at me, opening with the raw speed of the Golden Core realm. My right finger struck across hers like a blade plucked from its sheath, knocking her arm wide. Her feet shifted, and she ghosted past my flank, 2 fingers driving at my ribs like a point of steel. I turned with her, my own fingers angling down, tapping the back of her hand hard enough to sting and force her to snatch it back. We wove beneath the tree, parrying and countering her offense fierce, while my movements ran fluid and easy. After 30 exchanges, I felt her anxiety mounting, so I bared a deliberate flaw and let her tap my belly, then clutched my stomach and staggered back as though wounded. She did not press the opening. Instead, she stood there staring at me with eyes that burned, and I mimed pain while my skin crawled under that look, because it was the look of someone who wanted to devour me whole. Gang Gyeong drew a deep breath and admitted 3 times over that she had underestimated my comprehension ability for the Tao of the sword. My moves, she said, followed no pattern, yet every one was simple and direct, driving straight at the opponent's flaw, marking me a rare sword prodigy born once in 100 years. With a proper teacher, she promised, I would surely become a famed sword cultivator someday. I shook my head and told her fame could keep its distance, since renown only drew swarms of people eager to trouble me, and I hated fighting above all, to say nothing of killing. She stared, thoroughly amused, admitting she had never before met so cowardly a genius. Then she softened and apologized for scolding me in her impatience. She beckoned me back to the soul-snatching technique, insisting that even a sword prodigy had to master a few spells against the day danger came. I went over at once and resumed the practice. After the spar, her manner turned noticeably kinder, so gentle and soft-spoken that it gave me goosebumps, and so each night I came down to the grotto heaven to drill spells at her side. The moment one appeared on my attribute panel, I moved on to the next, and she assumed I was simply frustrated and never pushed me, since she carried more spells than she could ever spend. Teaching juniors while she nursed her injuries was, she found, a pleasant way to pass the years. On top of that, once a month I traveled out to the outer sect disciples' immortal cave to tend the herbs sealed within. As the year drew to its close, winter snow came sweeping down until it blotted out both sky and sun. Wearing a straw hat, I climbed halfway up the mountain and stopped before that same immortal cave. And just as I reached for my token, I sensed something amiss. There were people inside, and more than one. My first instinct was to turn and leave, but the conversation within the cave cut off abruptly. Fleeing now would only prove I could pierce the restriction and read the scene inside, so I had no choice but to press the token to the mountain gate and let it swing open. I passed through the cave tunnel into the chamber, and the sight of 3 people froze me for an instant. Then I bowed low and apologized for not knowing the senior had returned, promising not to disturb them. I turned to go, but the cave's owner raised a hand and told me there was no need, that I should do my work while they continued talking. His name was Jin Lee, a scholarly man who looked to be in his early 40s, refined and unhurried. So I turned back, bowed again, and walked toward the herb beds a little way off. The other 2 were a man and a woman, and the woman was none other than Lee Hyunyu, whom I had once crossed swords with. The man was not Shi Yang, but someone else entirely, graceful and so handsome that even another man would marvel at his face. Lee Hyunyu clearly knew me, though she said nothing. While I bent over the herbs, I quietly cast a lifespan probe at the handsome stranger. The reading surfaced in my mind like a private ledger only I could see. It marked him at the first layer of the Golden Core realm, his figures resting at 58 against 621, with a ceiling of 1508. The first layer of the Golden Core realm, and surely an inner sect disciple at that. Jin Lee sighed as he watched me pick, then turned to the other 2. He remarked that the World Outer Sect Assembly was nearly upon them, hosted once again by the Taeon sect, which meant the pressure fell heavy on their shoulders. The handsome man, whose probe had named him So Jinjun, only smiled and asked what there was to fear. The outer sect brimmed with geniuses, he said, and even if every rival sect and denomination joined hands, they would struggle to suppress the Taehan sect, the strongest power in the whole Taechang dynasty. Jin Lee shook his head. He had heard, he said, that the outer sects of the Go-Ho sect, the Cheonjol sect, and the Thousand Autumns Pavilion each nursed a genius with dual spiritual roots. All of them were deliberately stalling their realm in wait for this very assembly. He turned a reproachful eye on So Jinjin and complained that his junior should not have broken through so soon, since his own master must have known what was coming. So Jinjun laughed the worry away, pointing out that the assembly convened at least twice a century, so how could their generation of cultivators fret so much over one victory or defeat? The Taeon sect, he added, produced fresh geniuses every year, and the burden would never rest on Jin Lee alone. The 3 of them chatted on happily around the subject, So Jinjun and Jin Lee carrying most of it, while Lee Hyunyu dropped in a word here and there. I listened while I worked, and the whole thing felt like a passage lifted straight out of a storybook. A World Outer Sect Assembly, gathering the finest outer sect disciples of every major sect at the Taeon sect, disciples of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion among them. It would surely be a spectacle, and I listened with real interest, though a small worry gnawed at me. Would some cultivator from the Thousand Autumns Pavilion seize the chance to hunt me down and press me for intelligence on the Taehan sect? The 3 of them soon drifted to other matters, and the talk wandered toward the inner sect, which fascinated Jin Lee, who was curious what such a place even looked like. So Jinjun sketched it out in a few words, describing the flourishing inner sect cities, the peaks each guarding their profound legacies, the wealth of task rewards, and more besides. Even so, none of it stirred any longing in me. Inner sect disciples had to defend the Taechang dynasty, slaying demons and rooting out devils across its lands, while also helping the imperial dynasty repel invasions from rival dynasties beyond the borders. Merely hearing about it gave me a headache. Once I had finished the work and harvested several hundred years of lifespan from the beds, I came before Jin Lee to take my leave. Then Lee Hyunyu spoke up, saying my work was meticulous, and asking whether I might manage her immortal cave as well. Jin Lee laughed at once and vouched for me, calling my work satisfactory and disciplined, and noting that Lee Ya himself had recommended me, so I could be trusted. Lee Hyunyu simply fixed her gaze on me and waited for my answer. With every eye in the chamber upon me, refusal was impossible, so I nodded my agreement. She told the 2 senior brothers to continue their talk while she showed me the way, then rose and left, and I bowed hastily to both men before following in her steps. After the cave gate sealed behind us, So Jinjun asked Jin Lee with a smile whether Lee Hyunyu and Lee Ya truly bore a grudge, given how tangled the Lee family's grievances ran. Jin Li shook his head and answered that they could hardly hold a grudge, since she had once spoken up for Li Ya. Without her, Li Ya would have died under Shi Yang's hand long ago. Now that Shi Yang had been missing for several years, he even suspected Li Ya had done away with the man. So Jin Jun lifted his teacup and his expression turned subtle. I only learned all of this later. At the time, I merely followed Li Hyunyu out, and we rode away on a single flying sword while keeping a careful distance between us. Standing behind her, I caught a peculiar fragrance that was far more pleasant than the scent clinging to Gangyang, whose smell of a dead person still lingered faintly no matter how thoroughly she washed. The journey passed in silence, since her temperament was too cold to invite conversation, and I could not be bothered to break it. Her cave lay not far from Jin Li's, and before long we sat down. I felt at once that the restriction guarding her cave was stronger, and the sensation only deepened once we stepped inside, where the spiritual qi hung thick and rich around me. Li Hyunyu explained the origins of each herb and how it had to be cultivated, and I listened with care. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, she handed me a token that would open the cave directly, offering me the same terms Jin Li had. Harvesting the lifespan of those herbs was reward enough for me, and if spirit stones came along with it, I would hardly turn them away. I cupped my hands in a bow and made to leave. She stopped me suddenly, asking what my relationship with Li Ya was. I turned back and answered that Li Ya was my senior brother, so of course we were on good terms. I could tell she and Li Ya must share a decent relationship of their own, for if they were enemies, she would never scheme against him through a mere utility disciple like me. She said nothing more and only nodded faintly, and I took my leave again. Managing these caves for outer sect disciples was scarcely tiring, since I needed to visit only once every half month or so, and I felt I could easily shoulder more such work. My career tree was growing richer by the season. The 8 sceneries Grotto Heaven and the Mystic Valley formed the great twin trunks, and every branch that sprouted from them meant more lifespan flowing into my hands. I would push on and reach 100,000 years of lifespan before long. The winter snows melted, and the new year came around. On the eve of dusk, the Mystic Valley began stringing up lanterns and pasting decorations. Before the pavilion, the youngest of us, Gyeonjin, squatted on the ground cutting paper and asked me in a low voice what the Spring Festival really meant. She was 9 years younger than me, with a sweet face, wide eyes, and a gentle nature, and even No Guga and Socheon doted on her. I sat off to one side weaving a lantern. I told her that in my youth I had heard an old man describe the Spring Festival. It marked the dawn of a brand new year, a farewell to the old, and a welcome to the new, when people wished one another well. Since the Medicine Valley had no festivals of its own worth marking, I had decided to establish the Spring Festival for us. Not far off, Oshin, Socheon, and Dang Wu were hanging lanterns and pasting red paper. Ye Ran was preparing the food, and Sohan was making his rounds of the gardens. A look of anticipation lit Gyeonjin's face at my words. The whole idea had struck me only days earlier, when I overheard the valley folk trading stories of their scattered hometowns, and the memory of my old home on Earth had risen unbidden. The timing lined up neatly with the new year, so I named the Spring Festival the Mystic Valley's first true holiday. In time I could arrange others so that life here would not stay so dull. I still had no idea whether any other soul from Earth had crossed over into this human world. The old man was pure invention, a story I told to guard myself against suspicion. Just then I frowned, for 2 auras that set my skin prickling were closing on the Mystic Valley from less than 10 miles out. Both cultivators stood at the Foundation establishment realm, yet their auras reeked with a heavy stench of blood, the mark of men who had killed many. The World Outer Sect Assembly loomed near, so could these be demonic path cultivators drifting through? I prayed under my breath that they would give our valley a wide berth. What I feared came to pass regardless. For the pair flew straight at us, and before long their figures crested the mountaintop and looked down upon the Medicine Valley. They were a man and a woman, both robed in deep purple, both wrapped in an aura so evil and seductive that even in broad daylight they resembled fierce ghosts. The woman had a coiling figure, dark paint smeared across her face, and fingernails filed into long claws. She covered her mouth to laugh and urged her husband to rest here a while, since they had wandered so near the outer sect. They could squeeze a little intelligence out of the utility disciples besides. The burly man beside her wore a cold face and a purple crown set with a ruby that glared like a scarlet vertical eye. He answered coldly that a swarm of chi-refining insects had nothing worth learning in their mouths. He belonged to a great demonic path power, the 10,000 Yin sect, and his name was Seo Rue, come with his Dao companion Sun Hui to take part in the World Outer Sect Assembly. She laughed and reminded him how the Taehyun sect fought, weak in true strength yet forever bullying others through sheer numbers. Arrive early, she warned, and the two of them would only be dragged into endless trouble, so waiting out here suited them fine. Seo Rue conceded the point and leapt down into the valley, and Son Hui followed close behind. I lifted my eyes and cast a lifespan probe over each of them, Seo Rue read as a cultivator of the 9th layer of the Foundation Establishment realm, his figures at 67 against 389, ceiling 920. Sion Hui stood at the 7th layer of the same realm, her numbers at 74 against 370, ceiling 605. Both of them were plainly geniuses. As I rose, Gyeonjin followed my gaze, and the instant she saw the pair she scurried in terror to hide behind me. So Chan, Oh Shin, and Dang Wu caught sight of the two demonic path cultivators too, dropped everything, and rushed to my side. Seo Rue and his companion touched down among the garden beds, and their gazes raked over my herbs until my heart clenched tight. The Taehan sect's security was pitiful. With so grand an event approaching, they had not even posted disciples to patrol the outskirts. I cursed inwardly, though I knew well enough that the Mystic Valley meant little to the sect, since everything planted here was low-grade stock, meant to serve the outer sect. Son Hui turned her head, studied us, and asked who the Valley Master was. I stepped forward and cupped my hands, saying that I was, and asking what business the two seniors had here. She cast me a flirtatious glance and answered sweetly that she and her husband had come for the World Assembly at the Taehan sect. They wished to rest in my valley a few days, she said, asking what I thought. Meanwhile, Seo Rue's cold and sinister gaze slid to Ye-ran and Gyeonjin behind me, unsettling them both, and Ye-ran frowned and stepped in front of the younger girl. I was displeased, but just then I felt a familiar aura drawing near, so I asked which sect the two of them hailed from. Seo Nui's eyes went cold, and she opened her mouth to answer. Seo Rue cut her off, snapping that there was no point wasting words, that they meant to stay, and demanding whether a chi-refining 5th layer nobody like me could possibly drive them off. A terrifying killing intent burst from his body, and everyone present felt as though they had been plunged into an ice cellar. Then a cold voice fell from the sky asking whether the two from the 10,000 Yin sect truly wished to make enemies of the Taeyeon sect. We all looked up to see Lee Hyun-yu poised upon a flying sword, standing in the wind like an immortal. Son Hui bit out her name through gritted teeth. Lee Hyun-yu told them only to follow her, then turned and swept away, vanishing behind the peak. Seo Rue leapt after her, and the gourd at his waist flew loose and swelled beneath his feet. Sion Hu landed behind him, and the two rode the gourd away. The valley let out a collective breath. So Han, his face bloodless from Seo Rue's killing intent, asked whether those two had been demonic path cultivators. Oh Shin confirmed it, naming the 10,000 Yin sect a major demonic path power of great strength. So Cheon grumbled that our Taeyeon sect was a righteous sect, so why invite demonic path sects at all? The disciples fell to fearful discussion, all of them shaken, since without Lee Hyun-yu's arrival tonight might have ended in disaster. I turned to study the horizon with a slight frown, then told everyone to keep on with the spring festival preparations while I withdrew to my room to rest a while. Dusk deepened until the sky burned crimson. I stood before the side window of the pavilion and could already feel the tremor of a battle far off. A faint thing perhaps 30 miles from the Mystic Valley. Something tugged at me, and I climbed over the windowsill at once and slipped away into the mountain forest. In the distant woods, trees lay toppled and the ground was split with jagged cracks. Seo Rue and Sion Hui stood side by side, contempt curling on both their faces. Opposite them stood not only Lee Hyun-yu but a second figure, and it was none other than Lee Ya. Seo Rue laughed coldly that the Lee family's 9 swords of astonishment were indeed powerful, but their wielder's cultivation fell short. Blood streaked both corners of Lee Ya's mouth, and the hand gripping his sword trembled, while Lee Hyun-yu beside him was wounded too, though less gravely. Sion Hui ignored Lee Ya entirely, her gaze pinned on Lee Hyun-yu, and she laughed with enchanting cruelty. She sneered that the proud daughter of heaven had fallen into a sorry state indeed, and that the Lee siblings were plainly no match for the two of them. Seo Rue stepped toward Lee Ya, and Lee Hyun-yu suddenly hurled the sword in her hand, the blade splitting into 4 sword shadows in flight, all of them lancing at him. He reacted with terrifying speed, and a wave of his right hand loosed purple chi that erupted like flame, forcibly turning her sword aside. Like a phantom, Sion Hui appeared behind her, a red fan blooming in her grip, and she fanned it hard to send rolling red poison mist surging outward, forcing Lee Hyun-yu to leap clear. The red mist spread swiftly through the forest, and within it a great python darted, its passage stirring the vapor into rising billows that closed around both siblings in mere moments. Lee Hyun-yu landed beside Lee Ya and swept her eyes across the murk, but Son Hui had vanished, while Seo Rue hovered above the trees and gazed down at them. Lee Ya demanded in a deep voice whether they truly dared harbor murderous intent within the Taehan sect's own territory. Seo Rue's lips curled, and he mocked that he had long heard how vast and sprawling the Taehan sect had grown. Ever since the current sect leader took his seat, he said, the sect's grip on its peripheral lands had steadily weakened. It was as though the sect meant to leave the disciples to settle every quarrel out here for themselves. The 8 outer sect cities, he went on, were nothing but a wall, righteous sects sheltering inside while the world beyond obeyed only the law of the jungle, no better than the demonic path. He observed that they had fought this long, and no one had come, proof that the Taehyun sect had posted no guard beyond its walls at all. Today, he declared, he would kill Li Ya and carry off his sister, and if that cost him a seat at the World Outer Sect Assembly, so be it. As for the folk in the Medicine Valley, he would slaughter them too, since anyone Princess Li came in person to shield must share a close bond with Li Ya. Something dark occurred to him then, and he licked his lips. Lee Hyunwoo murmured for her brother to buy her time, then sat cross-legged and worked her hands through a rapid weaving of spells, a golden flame flickering to life between her brows. Li Ya's eyes narrowed, and his body dropped into a crouch before springing up, his long sword lifted high. Sword chi surged from the ground and pierced toward the heavens, its violent energy shaking the forest within several dozen feet, and even rolling up the red mist. It was a massive display, terrible and grand beneath the failing dusk. Seo Ruye only smiled with scorn and drew a large purple flag from the storage pouch at his waist, one embroidered with a ferocious evil ghost that seemed ready to lunge free at any instant. He flipped his left hand and struck down, and his spiritual power erupted into a giant palm shadow that crashed against Li Ya's sword chi and crushed it flat. Li Ya frowned, for his spiritual power fell far below Seo Rue's and could not contend at all. Under his horrified stare, the purple flag loosed a whirlwind that set his divine soul reeling upside down. A cold dread told him it had gone very wrong, and a violent dizziness struck him, though what frightened him most was that his body would not fall. The old ancestor's voice rang out in his mind, filled with shock and fury, warning that the man meant to seize his soul and that his audacity knew no bounds. Li Yanyu Rue laughed hideously and declared that he would taste the soul of the Taechang imperial lineage, his eyes swollen with greed. Then a sharp whine tore through the air from far away, so keen that Li Ya, locked in his mid-air struggle, could not help glancing toward it. Even Li Yanyu, deep in her meditation, lifted her eyes. A single leaf came riding a blade of sharp sword chi across the sky, swift as a bolt of lightning, striking straight at Seo Rue. His gaze snapped toward it by reflex, but the leaf flew far too fast for him to answer. His head burst apart in a scattering of blood mist, and the wind of the strike blew the forest's red haze into tatters. Li Ya-Yu channeled her own power against the gale yet, was still forced hurriedly to her feet. Seon-Hui shrieked her husband's name in the raging wind, and had only begun to spring away, when a second whine split the air. She turned her head, and a fearsome gust pressed the poison mist flat and drove across her body, dragging her robes backward against her curves. A leaf gleamed in her pupils. It punched clean through her skull. Blood sprang wide across the trees. The leaf sped on to fell tree after tree, kicking up rolling dust before it buried itself in the trunk of a great pine. Seo Rue's corpse dropped to the ground, and Seon-Hui's followed, and after that only the sound of the wind remained in the forest. Li Ya propped himself upright on the earth, his black hair wild, utterly stunned, while not far off Lee Hyunwoo stared at the two corpses in a frightened trance. The old ancestor's voice rose again in Li Ya's mind, marveling that a flying leaf had executed the enemy with such domineering sword chi. He judged its wielder to stand at the nascent soul realm at the very least, with attainments in the sword Tao that soared beyond measure. Li Ya woke from his daze, scrambled up and cupped his hands to call out, asking which senior had made the move. Lee Hyunwoo rose too and searched the surroundings, yet no one answered them. Then the old ancestor urged the boy to go look toward a certain quarter, and Li Ya walked that way at once, trembling, his injuries and the theft of his soul leaving him wretched. Lee Hyunwoo went to inspect the corpses, even stabbing each of them twice and shattering their hearts with sword chi. Li Ya walked a full 200 feet and halted before a tree, and his gaze fell upon the trunk until he could not help but be moved. He whispered that it could not be possible. Following his eyes, a single leaf sat driven into the trunk, wound about with a thread of sword chi, the whole trunk already split and seeming ready to explode. The old ancestor's voice thickened with emotion, saying the stranger had struck from 10 miles off, and that he could capture only the direction of the blow, and never the aura behind it. He clicked his tongue in wonder and allowed that the Taehan sect was perhaps not so bad after all, keeping a great cultivator to watch over the outer wilds. Li Ya stared at the leaf and fought to steady his heart, and when Lee Hyunwoo came up behind him and saw it clearly, she too was stunned. Night settled fully, and in the mystic valley the Valley Master's Pavilion blazed with lanterns and streamers. My disciples and I sat around a great round table, drinking and talking, the mood bright and warm. So Cheon and Dangwoo had squared off over their cups. So Cheon, though a junior martial uncle by rank, wore a flushed and stubborn face and drank on, deaf to every plea to stop. The wine was no ordinary brew but a spiritual vintage I had bought specially from the outer sect. 1 jar worth 2 low-grade spirit stones, the equal of 2 months' salary for a utility disciple. Then Sohan asked whether more demonic cultivators might come after the two from earlier, and the moment the words left him, the whole table went cold. Every smile faded, and worry crept over their faces. I comforted them with a smile, telling them to rest easy, since outer sect disciples surely patrolled these hills, and after today's incident, the patrols would only tighten. In truth, I felt no worry at all, because I was drowning in quiet delight. Executing Seo Rue and Sionhue had won me 112 years of lifespan in a single stroke. I had been piecing together the arithmetic of these gains. The best I could reckon was that a kill yielded somewhere between 0.5% and 2% of the target's remaining lifespan. The exact figure never held fixed, feeling rather like a matter of luck. Killing cultivators paid far better than tending herbs, yet I hoped never to run into such a thing again. Spill too much blood and trouble would find me sooner or later, so leaning on medicinal herbs the way I did now was at least the safer road. There was always a heaven beyond the heavens, and always someone stronger waiting ahead. Even if slaughter could hoist me up quickly, one foe far beyond my measure would still leave me dead. I could not begin to guess how high the strongest cultivation in this world truly reached. Still, if I kept my head down for 1,000 years, or 10,000, I ought to grow invincible in the end. My words seemed to make sense to everyone, and the table warmed again. I let my own schemes rest and turned to my juniors, drawing out their goals for cultivation, and as the mood climbed, even I began to drink. The Mystic Valley's first spring festival counted as a full success, and it was deep into the night before we all parted ways. Afterward, I made my way down to the 8 Sceneries Grotto Heaven, where Gang Yong sat meditating beneath the azure vine tree, circulating her power while devilish chi swirled around her in an eerie, terrible cloud. I carried the food to her and wished her a swift recovery, explaining that this was the spring festival of the Mystic Valley, and that my junior sister had cooked the dishes herself. Her eyes opened and she asked in confusion what sort of festival the spring festival even was, so I gave her the same old man story I told everyone who asked. She nodded her approval, granting that establishing a festival was a fine notion, since it could knit people's hearts together, then eyed the basket and wooden box in my hands. I set them down and drew out the dishes one by one, along with a small jar of wine. Her beautiful eyes brightened, and she reasoned aloud that since the food came from my sincerity, she could hardly refuse to eat it. She scooped up a bowl and shoveled it down, devouring it greedily, and I hurried to pour her wine while working up the nerve to ask a question that had long puzzled me. I asked why the Thousand Autumns Pavilion bothered planting spies out beyond the outer sect, since the Mystic Valley seemed hopelessly placed to gather any real intelligence. She rolled her eyes at me and answered irritably that no one had asked me to gather anything, that my task was only to guard the place with a settled heart. Once the azure vine tree finished growing, she said, this spot would become a stronghold for the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, and there were others whose whole trade was intelligence. That left me more uneasy than before. A stronghold, on top of everything else, and I frowned and asked whether the Mystic Valley alone could serve such a purpose. She replied offhandedly that it was hardly alone, that at least 5 other Medicine Valley masters were spies of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, none of them aware of the others' identities. As long as 100 years ago, she added, Pavilion spies had already climbed to the rank of true disciple, and by now they had likely risen to elder-level figures. I fell silent, thinking that the Taeon sect leaked like a sieve. She set down her clean plate and took up a fat chicken leg. She smiled that the food was not bad, and that although she had long since fasted, indulging her appetite now and then was no crime. As a reward, she promised she would teach me one of the pavilion's secret techniques later. I asked eagerly which secret technique she meant, for I had already learned a great many spells from her, and where spells were concerned, the more the merrier. Once she left, I would never again stumble onto so devoted a grandmaster. She bit into the chicken leg and smiled with smug pride, naming it one of the 9 great secret techniques of the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, the demonic shadow divine art. The name gave me pause, and I asked whether it was a cultivation technique, since I lacked none of those, and switching methods would force me to rebuild my spiritual power and waste precious lifespan. She corrected me around a mouthful of chicken, insisting it was a secret technique, one that would help me play the mole far better, and that I would understand soon enough. My face twitched at that, for I had no wish to play the mole for the demonic path. Still, I decided to simply wait her out. Once she was gone, I would say what suited a man to a man's face and what suited a ghost to a ghost's. Out in the Jianghu, one's identity was only ever what one made of it. The next day at noon, I sat reading beneath a tree, while Ye Ran and Gyeonjin drilled sword forms 7 steps away, their figures graceful, though sadly none of it drew my eye. Then So Cheon came running to announce that senior brother Li Ya had arrived, and Li Ya indeed followed on his heels. I rose at once, tucked the travels of the Azure Wanderer into my robes, and walked to meet him, and he said only that we should talk inside the building, so I led him upstairs. Behind us, Gion Jin stopped her sword and asked Ye Ran nervously whether Li Ya had come because of the two demonic cultivators from the day before. Yi Ran answered softly that perhaps he had. Upstairs I sat across from Li Ya and poured his tea, asking what troubled him. He said he meant to stay in the Mystic Valley for half a year, and asked whether that was acceptable. I told him without hesitation that it was naturally fine, that he could stay as long as he liked, then asked with concern whether something had happened. He hesitated, then decided to tell me about the previous day, reasoning that if I knew of such dangers, the pressure might drive me to cultivate harder. When he finished, I widened my eyes and asked in feigned astonishment whether the two were truly dead, and whether the 10,000 Yin sect would not come seeking revenge. He snorted that the pair had attacked him and Li Hyun-yu, so if anyone came looking for trouble, it would be the Taehan sect hunting the 10,000 Yin sect. The imperial court would lean on them besides, since Li Hyun-yu was his father's most cherished daughter. I asked, playing the innocent, how they had dared attack him at all. He answered that Seo Rue and the Cicada Fairy stopped at no evil. Son Hui and Li Hyun-yu had formed a feud back in Ye City, so having finally caught his sister alone, they would never let the chance slip. Then he began another thought with the word "and," only to bite it off at the end. When I pressed him on what came after, he muttered that it was nothing. I wanted to smack him since a man who refused to finish a sentence had no business starting it with "and." He looked at me and asked whether I had seen anyone else pass by the Medicine Valley since the day before, and I shook my head. He said that had I glimpsed the Nascensol senior who intervened, I would understand, because without that senior, he and Li Hyun-yu would have been finished. That senior's sword Dao, he said, was truly terrifying, felling enemies by plucking mere leaves, treating a ninth-layer Foundation establishment cultivator like a stalk of vegetable in a field, a single leaf enough to kill. He warned to the tail and poured out every detail of the battle, and I widened my eyes and gasped at the right moments, as though listening to some heavenly scripture. The senior had thrown only 2 leaves, yet Li Ya spent every scrap of vocabulary he had ever learned describing it. A true sword cultivator, he proclaimed, ought to be exactly so, for having no sword surpassed having one, and whatever a man held in his hand became his sword. He had found his direction, he said, and would devote himself to the sword from now on. I nodded along while smirking privately, thinking that the very senior he was praising sat right before his eyes, and only his shallow cultivation kept him from seeing through me. I broke into his reverie to ask why the sect had sent no one to patrol or protect us, utility disciples, during so grand an event. Within a 50-mile radius of the Mystic Valley stood at least 6 immortal caves of outer sect disciples. His smile drained away, and he answered grimly that I should consider why anyone in the sect had dared raise a greedy demon out beyond the outer sect. It was because the sect held utility disciples in no regard at all, though he promised he would stand guard himself until the World Outer Sect Assembly ended. After a pause, I asked whether he did not mean to compete, and he shook his head. His cultivation was not enough, he said, and entering rashly would earn only injury, since such an event belonged to those at the 9th layer of the Foundation establishment realm. The answer made me regard him with fresh respect, since he actually possessed self-awareness, though I suppose the blow Seo Rue had dealt him might account for some of it. We talked a while longer before heading downstairs, where I asked So Qian and Dang Wu to clear out a courtyard so Li Ya could live alone. When the valley learned he would stay half a year, everyone rejoiced, first for the protection and second for the chance to learn sword techniques from him. In their eyes, I was skilled at nearly everything, yet my spells ran too thin to guide them, while Li Ya was a genuine Foundation establishment cultivator. Over the following days, cultivators frequently soared above the Mystic Valley on their swords, and I glimpsed flying magical artifacts and Yao Beast mounts that made me marvel that this, truly, was the cultivation world. A month later, deep in the night, Gang Gyong lounged against the azure vine tree with her right leg dangling, her fair calves gleaming beneath the hem. A book rested in one hand, and her eyes drifted toward me, picking herbs in the distance. She flipped upright, and the book flew into the pendant at her neck as she stretched and loosened her body. She called me her good grand disciple and told me to stop fussing over the beds and come practice the demonic shadow divine art. Then she leapt down before the pill furnace, where medicinal pills bubbled and white smoke curled from beneath the lid. I answered without turning that I would be done soon. She shook her head and smiled, thinking the kid was rare in his diligence, and that she really ought to refine some pills for me. Half an incense stick later, I brought the gathered herbs to her side and laid them out by category with great care. This pleased her all the more, and she marveled to herself that this child was truly impeccable. In one clean sweep, I had harvested over 1,300 years of lifespan, and my mood soared, since chances at such a haul came rarely. She told me to keep practicing and to ask her anything I failed to grasp, her gaze fixed on the furnace. I began drilling the demonic shadow divine art, which I had labored at for a month without seeing its surface on my attribute panel, and the delay grated on me. I resolved to master it now. The grotto heaven fell into silence as the two of us sat cross-legged near the pill furnace, the drifting smoke blurring our shapes. 4 more days passed before the demonic shadow divine art at last appeared on my attribute panel, and I studied the readout with a satisfied smile. My private ledger listed my name and set my lifespan at 27 against 12,268. It marked my spiritual root as a first-class 5 elements root with the wood and earth attributes standing out, and my cultivation at the 8th layer of the nascent soul realm. Under cultivation technique, it held the fire control art unmastered, the divine wood pure yang art at consummate, and the dragon force divine primordial art at consonant. Alchemy sat at beginner, while the myriad gu profound art and the yin and yang art both stayed unmastered. The supreme skill line showed the whirlwind shadowless kick as proficient, the grand azure startling divine sword as proficient, the 8 direction steps unmastered, and the demonic shadow divine art unmastered at last. My spells listed the soul snatching technique unmastered, the sword kinesis technique proficient, the soul bewitching eyes unmastered, the poison wood array at beginner, the wind control art unmastered, and the corpse control art unmastered. Once a thing showed on the panel, it was real. Gang Kyung had drilled 8 cultivation techniques and spells into me across more than 5 years, and that alone was thoroughly competent. It even shifted my view of her, for though she walked the demonic path, her teaching manner outstripped the righteous path by a wide margin. I stood and bowed, saying we should stop for the night since I wished to rest. She remained cross-legged before the pill furnace, wreathed in devilish chi, her eyes never opening. She told me to cultivate well and said she would leave in 2 years at most. I said nothing and turned to go. She cracked one eye toward my back and thought the kid looked a little sad, and where after all would he ever find so fine a grandmaster again? Seeing me so lonely and helpless, she resolved that when she returned, she would find someone to take my place here. She would bring me along to cultivate in the Thousand Autumns Pavilion, and have her father arrange a proper teacher for my sword Dao. I kept my back to her and walked briskly toward the cave mouth, biting down my joy so no laugh would slip free, thinking only that I was finally rid of her. Kind as she was, I far preferred to enjoy the 8 sceneries grotto heaven alone. Back in the mountain forest, I did not head straight for the building, but struck off into the distance to find a spot where I could invest 1 year of lifespan into my cultivation. I felt myself near the 9th layer of the nascent soul realm, perhaps only days away, yet even so I held myself in check and invested no more than a single year each day. 20 miles out, I sat cross-legged beneath a tree and lowered my aura to its faintest, until I was scarcely more than another of the flowers and grasses. I invested 1 year of lifespan, and spiritual chi came rushing toward me at once, the surrounding blossoms swaying as though cheering me toward an early breakthrough. Soon, the heaven and earth spiritual chi settled back into calm, marking 1 year of absorption complete. I stood to leave, and just as I made to step off, something snagged my senses, so I ducked behind a tree. About 4 breaths later, 2 whining streaks cut through the air and shot past above my head. My eyesight was extraordinary, and I caught both figures cleanly, casting 2 lifespan probes as they passed. The first read as a cultivator of the 9th layer of the golden core realm named Jaehwa Ilgyam, his figures at 142 against 490, sealing 980. The second was a foundation establishment 2nd layer named Jaehwa Rim, his numbers at 27 against 280, sealing 1,400. The 9th layer of the golden core realm intrigued me, and I wondered quietly which sect the pair belonged to. Once they had flown far off, I slipped back to the Mystic Valley. The next morning I led the disciples through their drills as always, and Li Ya greeted me and said he was off to the outer sect. It was not until noon that he flew back on his sword, and he brought someone with him, none other than Jaehwa Rim, the very man I had probed the night before. Li Ya walked up and introduced him as his childhood friend, come to discuss sword techniques, and asked to house him in his own courtyard. Jaehwa Rim wore yellow robes and had a handsome face, though the arrogance in his brows could not be hidden, and the precious sword at his waist was plainly no common grade. When Li Ya introduced me in turn, Jaehwa Rim only tipped his head slightly and said nothing at all. Unfazed, I smiled and told Li Ya to let his friend stay, and Li Ya nodded with an apologetic look in his eyes. Jaehwa Rim tugged Li Ya along, gushing that Ji Rim of the Ji clan had been magnificent that day, and asking whether he had seen the man's sword work. He called it exquisite beyond words and predicted the man had a real hope of taking the whole thing. The name Ji-Rim conjured a handsome, arrogant face in my mind. Like me, Ji-Rim had entered the Taehan sect under Ji Hyowoo's patronage, and though the two of us had scarcely spoken, Duya had once come to gather herbs on his behalf. I had never expected Ji-Rim to shine at the World Outer Sect Assembly, given that he was only a few years my senior. Then again, it likely owed much to his resources, since the Taehan sect's support layered atop the Ji clan's wealth could easily carry a man's cultivation forward in leaps. I strolled toward the tree while my ears stayed fixed on the two of them. The World Outer Sect Assembly had already opened, gathering the genius disciples of both the righteous and demonic paths to vie for supremacy. From their talk, the matches ran one against one, the undefeated slowly making names for themselves. I never once heard the name Ji Hyowoo, which made sense on reflection, since she did not belong to the outer sect at all. So Cheon, Oshin, and the others were desperately curious about Jawa Rim, and clustered in twos and threes to gossip over him. His arrival, though, disturbed nothing of the valley's rhythm, for he plainly disdained us utility disciples, drilling sword forms with Li Ya and then retreating to his room to cultivate. Because of the pair, I trimmed back my visits to the 8 sceneries grotto heaven, though I held fast to my daily plans. A month slipped by, and at last I reached the 9th layer of the nascent soul realm. That night, walking home, my whole body felt light and buoyant. Back at the Mystic Valley, I found someone drilling sword forms in Lia's courtyard, so I climbed to my own pavilion and only paused to watch from the window once I was inside. The one wielding the blade was Jawa Rim. When he first arrived, I had taken him for a sword genius. Yet after a month of watching him practice every single day, I concluded that his talent for the Tao of the sword was thoroughly ordinary. My own comprehension of the sword had risen enough by then that I could see it clearly. His gift did not even match Sohan's, and Sohan owned the strongest sword talent in the valley, which counted for little once you stepped beyond our gates. I watched a while longer, then closed the window. When dawn broke, I went downstairs to find Jawa Rim still rooted in the courtyard, glowering at the sword in his hand. I called the juniors and disciples out for their exercises, and the commotion drew his attention. Liya came to his side and murmured that he need not force the sword, that with an aptitude so formidable he might find the sword twice as easy once his realm climbed higher. Jawa Rim's face darkened, and he insisted he must become a sword cultivator, since his father was the Azure Lake sword fanatic. Liya moved to talk him out of it, then thought better of it, realizing he was no different himself, each of them straining to prove something to his own father. Jawa Rim stared hard at me and the disciples working through our forms, and for some reason he sensed a hidden mystery in my movements. They were plainly the same movements everyone else performed, yet when I performed them they carried some buried secret. At first he took it for his imagination, but the longer he watched, the more certain he grew that he was not mistaken. Liya did not linger to disturb him, and instead turned toward the mountain forest, since he too needed long hours to cultivate. He rarely spoke of his defeat by Seoruye, yet he kept it lodged in his heart, and he did not mean to lose again. Once I finished a set of exercises, I let the valley folk scatter to their own tasks. The affairs of the place no longer required my personal hand, for Oshin was gradually taking up the authority of the senior brother. So Chan had a dull temperament and disliked commanding or arranging anything, so he was glad to let Oshin carry it. Yi Ran needed no explaining, since she had already sharpened her focus to sprint for the outer sect assessment. For those of merely average aptitude, only one road led into the outer sect. They had to reach the 9th layer of the Qi refining realm, sit the assessment, and upon passing, wait for the outer sect to hand down a foundation establishment pill. Anyone who could break through to the foundation establishment realm on their own, of course, would need no assessment at all. I was weighing whether to sharpen my alchemy so I could refine foundation establishment pills for my juniors myself. Every herb the pill required grew right here in the valley, leaving only the alchemy itself as the true hurdle. Yi Ran still stood some distance from the 9th layer of the Qi refining realm, which left me ample room to mull it over, while Sochian lagged further behind. With most people's aptitude, they would never touch the 8th layer of the Qi refining realm, even if they toiled a lifetime. I walked on toward the pavilion, drew the travels of the Azure Wanderer from my robes, and let anticipation spread across my face. I had deliberately hoarded the last 5 chapters, saving them for a fine, clear day. Heavy rain would pour, the Azure hero and his lady Yin would meet in a ruined temple, and all the tangled grievances and love between them were about to break loose completely. The mere thought of it set my heart racing. Then Jawa Rim's voice reached me, calling me Brother Go-An, and I turned to see him hurrying over. Arriving before me, he looked faintly embarrassed, but I bore no grudge over his earlier arrogance, and simply asked with a smile whether something was the matter. He gritted his teeth and said he had observed that my set of moves was remarkably exquisite, and asked whether I might teach it to him. I answered that it was no trouble at all, and suggested we go under the tree. He stood stunned, not expecting me to be so agreeable, and suddenly gripped by shame. He hurried to keep pace with me. We reached the courtyard before the pavilion, and I wasted no words before showing him how to run through the exercises. Jawa Rim had a photographic memory, so a single demonstration was all it took for him to learn the whole thing. Then he frowned and asked whether that was really all, and I answered in genuine confusion that these were all the moves there were. He demanded to know the mind cultivation technique behind them, and I told him plainly there was none. He insisted it was impossible, that without a mind cultivation technique I could not possibly, then trailed off, and his words only muddled me further. So I asked how exactly I could not. Growing agitated, he said the feeling I gave him was simply different, that the same movement in my hands became something else, and that I must be concealing some mind cultivation technique. I was helpless before him, wondering privately whether the boy had addled his own wits chasing the Tao of the sword. Seeing my expression, Zhao Rim grew more embarrassed still, since reason told him a mere utility disciple could not be hiding some peerless mind cultivation technique. Yet his instinct refused to be wrong. From childhood he had been keenly sensitive to a person's aptitude and aura, and even his master had praised him for a delicate spiritual heart and a gift for reading people. This utility disciple before him, he was certain, was anything but simple. His eyes rolled, and he offered a bargain, saying he would teach me his sword techniques if I would only give them a try. I wanted to refuse, but seeing how he looked, I feared I would never shake him loose, so I could only nod and agree, telling myself I might as well learn it. Noticing I carried no sword, Jawa Rim drew a long blade from his storage pouch and passed it to me, then unsheathed the precious sword at his waist and began demonstrating his technique. The boy truly had no sense of restraint, and I grumbled inwardly at why he swung the blade so fast, though my eyes followed his every motion with real attention. In the distance, Dang Wu and So Han caught sight of the scene, and, not daring to draw near, they could only watch from afar. So Han said with hope that if their master learned it, surely he could teach them, since of all the paths of immortality, only the sword cultivators stirred his heart. Dang Wu nodded and vowed that once master learned it, they would go and beg him, for master would never refuse them. In their eyes I was the finest master alive, and the whole question turned on whether I could actually learn Jua Rim's technique. The answer naturally was yes. I had already sunk 2,000 years of lifespan into the Li family 7 swords, so my attainment in the Tao of the sword already ran high. Good as Jua Rim's technique looked to me, it fell short of the upgraded 7 swords, let alone the 9 swords of astonishment. In any case, a man like him would hardly hand over his strongest technique straight away. When he finished, he turned back and asked how much I had retained. I shook my head and offered him 2% at best, adding that I could not truly say. His technique flowed so smoothly it left me dazzled, and I had already forgotten the earlier moves. Jawa Rim frowned and pressed me to try it anyway, so I set out to reproduce the technique he had just performed, my movements halting and my strokes stiff, until his frown carved deeper. Off in the distance, Dang Wu and So Han sank into despair, certain now that their master simply could not learn it. After I stumbled through it, Jua Rim refused to give up and ran the whole thing again, slower this time. Yet still I failed to remember it. After half an hour of this fumbling, I found an excuse and slipped away. Furious, Zhao Rim went to Li Ya and complained that I was making a fool of him. Once he understood the reason, Li Ya was dumbfounded and told him that I honestly had no talent for the Tao of the sword and despised practicing it. Zhao Rim asked whether that was truly so, and though his anger ebbed considerably, he could not help recalling my bearing during the exercises. And he still felt I was hiding something. Li Ya reminded him that I was his junior brother, so how could he fail to know me, then glared and warned him not to pester me again. It was generous enough that he had let the man stay. He could crawl back to the outer sect and find his father. Jawa Rim fell into deep thought, his gaze drifting toward the pavilion where I lived, though what he pondered I could not guess. On my side, within the pavilion, I sat cross-legged on the bed with my eyes shut, savoring the sword technique Zhao Rim had shown me. When I opened them again, sword light flickered in my gaze. I pulled up my attribute panel, and there in the special skills column sat a new entry, the Wood Spirit Sword Technique. The name gave me pause, and I wondered whether it might be a wood attribute sword technique. My Divine Wood Pure Yang art already carried the wood attribute, so drilling wood attribute methods earned me twice the result for half the effort. I recalled how swiftly I had mastered the poison wood array that Gang Yong once taught me. Even so, I had no wish to upgrade this technique for now, since I meant to bank 100,000 years of lifespan first. The lifespan probe had unlocked at 1,000 years, and the lifespan barrier at 10,000. So 100,000 years should surely unlock a new function of its own, and I had been looking forward to it for a long while. The days slid past one after another, and almost every one brought a cultivator sailing over Mystic Valley on a flying sword. Each time a figure passed overhead, I let my lifespan probe brush across them to read their realm. Now and then I even caught a glimpse of someone in the Nascent Soul realm, though I could never tell which sect they answered to. Spring left, summer came, and somewhere in the turning I passed my 28th year. Ever since reaching the 9th level of the Nascent Soul realm, I had put my daily plans on hold, unwilling to burn lifespan for scraps of progress. I meant to save up a monstrous reserve and then force the breakthrough all at once. Besides hard work, I had also come to believe in a little metaphysics. The heavy heat of summer settled over the mountains. I lay under a tree with a book while Ocean marshaled Dang Wu, So Han and Gyeon Jin through the weeding, and So Cheon and Ye ran cultivated down in the valley. Dang Wu kept wiping his brow, and each time his eyes drifted toward the volume in my hand, bright with curiosity. The greatest riddle in the whole valley was what the Travels of the Azure Wanderer actually contained. All 3 disciples had begged to read it at one time or another, but I had tucked the entire set away where no one could reach it. They had combed the library end to end and never found a single page. A fat white rat came bursting out of the grass and ran up into my arms, and it was of course the white spirit rat. I noticed it had something clamped in its mouth, and I sat up straighter as it spat out an egg the size of a hen's egg. The shell was a pale cyan white marked with wavy brown ripples, and I could sense the faint churn of spiritual chi trapped inside. A Yao beast egg, then. I had seen such eggs once or twice at the outer Sex City, where the prices ran from merely painful to figures that made my scalp prickle. While Oshin and the others had their backs turned, I swept the egg into my storage pouch without a sound. The rat lifted its head and looked thoroughly pleased, and I found the whole thing so funny that I hugged it and petted it half to death.